Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to the minigame podcast. We'll do some warm up. I'm not even sure it's going to be an hour today, and then we'll jump into the video game news, which for some weird way, today March 10th, Mario Day, there really isn't that much news either. I assume it was just kind of a slow weekend. So yeah, today may be a shorter stream, relatively speaking, in the sense that it may only go 2 hours or so. So as I try to warm up, we'll be scrolling down the SteamDB 24-hour peak concurrent player charts to see what people are playing. It definitely seems like it is always really going to be the big games that are fairly consistent, although Monster Hunter Wilds is an exception to that, as that is a brand new game, but it is a brand new game that may be fairly consistent, at least until there is another Monster Hunter game. The video that shows when you hover over this shows an interesting looking character or two that I wouldn't have really expected to be what you're looking for, or what you would get. Since Monster Hunters is a Capcom game from a Japanese company, it is kind of strange to see that they have more dark-skinned characters in their trailer, which, I don't know, maybe this Monster Hunter Wilds is out in a different region. Split Fiction is also new as a game, and it has had a massive amount of success, although I would put a caveat on these co-op only games in that you're going to basically have to have a massive amount of success in the first couple of weeks of your launch of these games, because you're going to need two people to play the game with you, or two people to play the game in total. So 6 weeks from now, 6 months from now, a year from now, 2 years from now, sales of Split Fiction are probably going to be lower than your average game would be at that point, average even successful game. Contrast that to something like Counter-Strike 2, which has been out since 2012 under a different name. It's just been renamed Counter-Strike 2 relatively recently, in the past year or so. But yeah, that game is just constantly being played, and that's not even a good comparison now that I think about it, because this game also requires you to find a team of 4 players and doesn't have a solo mode either. In fact, yeah, I suppose I should have made a comparison to some other game that I knew was a single player game, and unfortunately the first recognizable single player game in this list is Banana, a idle clicker scam game, from what I can tell. So I guess my argument falls apart, as I can't even cite an example here. Sims 4, maybe, way down here in the 34th spot. Yeah. It's no wonder, I guess. Let me think of a different thought then. It's no wonder that they put so much emphasis on multiplayer in games, in that these charts are constantly full of multiplayer people. And yeah, you are effectively doubling your player base by just forcing a game to require 2 players. And Split Fiction is not even quadrupling the player base like Counter-Strike 2 would go. Like, inherently, if you were going to balance things out, you take this 1.6 million player base and divide it by 4 to get down to still a fairly respectable 800,000 number. But then also, if you were going to really try to do a deep dive, you probably cut that 800,000 in half for the vast amount of bots that I think are, particularly in Counter-Strike 2, trying to still grind for knife skins and make real world money through selling knife skins through third-party sites. over the weekend, I finished, after having finished Borderlands pre-sequel, pretty terrible game, I started playing a game called Six Sides of the World, a little puzzle game. It looks a little bit like Mario Galaxy, except for instead of mini little circular planets and having some gravity aspects and in an actual physics, it is instead six-sided cuboids, dice, basically, for most of the levels. And they're puzzle levels, and there really is no real gravity to it. It would have been the exact same experience had it just been a 2D top-down game. There are just a lot of teleporters. Almost certainly an overemphasis on teleporters that would teleport you from one face of the cube to the next face of the cube, which introduces the number one worst part about Six Sides of the World, and it's not really a game that's known, and it's not really a game I'd recommend. But the number one problem with it is the camera. The camera angles that were chosen seem to have been chosen at random. This is a small indie game made basically by one person, although I don't know why I say that. There was a small other people were credited, and frankly at this point it's not realistic to say any indie game is actually made by one person, because all of them are going to asset stores and getting assets. They're not all asset flipping in the sense that they're just taking assets, putting no effort into polishing them or making them custom for their own game, and then selling them on Steam just to make money and basically scheme and scam people. But yeah, even indie games, they're going to asset stores. They're using assets. Maybe you could convince me something simplistic like Fez might have been animated by hand without going to an asset store. I don't think so, though. I think undoubtedly that some of those there are assets in that game as much as there are in any other game. A text game, perhaps, that was 100% text and had no visuals and had no audio. Yes, then you could convince me they didn't use anybody else's work. But even in that, inherently, if you're making a text game, and you're probably not coding the compiler by yourself, and so really the more I think about it, everything is a collaborative work, everything is iterative. So the idea of the single independent developer is just something that needs to be dropped in favor of saying this was a small team. Even if one person is the only person taking credit, undoubtedly they used some kind of game engine, they used some kind of programming library. There were a lot more people than that one person. There are no gods in game programming, as much as the egos of game programmers and game developers might want it to be. But yeah, nobody is just snapping their fingers and creating games out of nothing. They are creating games after using libraries, might be even simplistic like C++ standard input-output libraries that almost every programming language has been influenced by, if not uses. But more than likely, you're not just using libraries, you're using compilers made by other people, you're using game engines made by other people, and then you're going to asset stores to use art and music and sound and often voice acting and writing. Like, it is just a collaborative only effort, which I think once again probably highlights how we are educating wrongly in schools, probably in most cases, because I think most things are collaborative efforts. And so the idea of individual education, particularly in computer programming, needs to be very well balanced out with group projects. Of course, you need to have everybody understand the basic fundamentals of things in a programming class. You can't have a group project on day one and then have one person on the team know everything and do all the work, and then the other 3 people on the project not doing anything. So yeah, you have to kind of have a balance there. But I do think group projects are closer to the reality of how these things get done and the reality of how work is done in office situations of programming, whether it's games or otherwise. Programming feels like it would be this solitary exercise, but it really isn't. And really, one of the best systems I've heard about that sounds very intriguing is the idea of partnering up when programming, in that you have a 2-seat setup where for 20 minutes to an hour, one person types in what the other person is describing in at least a little rough draft concepts. This is perhaps early in development. Later on, they may split up and work on polishing. But yeah, you'll typically have someone who is a junior, somebody who's kind of new to the company, and then you'll have somebody that's a senior who's been there for a long time. And for 20 minutes to an hour, one of them will describe what they want the program to do, the other will type it and do the actual coding in at least rough things, and the whole idea is to mostly just keep pace with the person talking. So if you don't really know how to do it, you would just add a comment as far as do this, or you would do as best as you can. And generally the person who's talking is looking at the code but not really critiquing the code or telling them how to fix it. They're supposed to swap after that 20 minutes to an hour, and then the junior might be describing what they want, and the senior might be coming in there and fixing old code that the junior just typed to show the junior how you could be more efficient with it, or how to even accomplish it in the first place. Of course, companies hate that concept, or a lot of them do, because it feels like you're paying two people to do one person's job, but that is also coming from the mindset of a company just expecting new hires to 100% be perfect on day one, which is not really a realistic expectation. And so that was a side conversation. I call them rants, but I probably shouldn't. As far as just how collaborative games are. Regardless, though, 6 Sides of the World fails in a lot of places. Its camera is awful. Depending on the angle that the camera is looking, controls where the controls go. So very often you'll get a slightly different angle with the gamepad, which I don't know if it would have been really much better if I tried to play mouse and keyboard with it. But yeah, you'll get a slightly different angle, and then you'll press up on the analog stick, the left analog stick, and you'll go downward when you meant to go upward. And that is just completely unacceptable, because there's a lot of lasers that will kill you, and no checkpoints at all in the puzzles where there clearly should have been checkpoints. Stepping through a teleporter could easily have been a checkpoint, where you always just respawned when you stepped through a teleporter. Maybe you would need rolling checkpoints and have 2 or 3 in case you died instantly when you spawned on the teleporting pads, which there are some points where you do go through a teleporting pad and just get killed instantly. And so you have to spin the cube around to make sure a spinning laser isn't about to hit you, which is cheap and unfair. There's a couple of puzzles that are incredibly timing based, where the vast majority of the other puzzles are minimally timing based, if timing based at all. I do have a temptation to play Belaucho, but if I was going to do it, I'm going to have to just buy the game at full price. And yeah, I'm not sure I'm quite ready to commit to buying games full price, particularly since I have a ton of games still in my backlog otherwise. Noticeably, I'm making extremely minimal progress as far as cleaning and decluttering my house. I put that on the back burner to work on the United States taxes because there's a deadline around that, but also I've only done kind of minimal progress on that too, so I should shift my priority a little bit. Yeah, I don't know if there's really even anything too much more to say about Six Sides of the World. It's really just not a game I can recommend. The puzzles are too large, and it is very deceptive in that there are different solar systems, and at the beginning you get like 8 levels, and then the next solar system you get closer to maybe 6 levels, and then maybe you get another 6 levels, then you get like 4 levels, then you get like 1 level at the last one. There's some extra levels that are completely different from the main levels. So overall, even though it ended up taking me probably close to 15 plus hours to beat the game, it wasn't satisfactory as far as just the count of the number of levels, which could have easily been fixed if every one of the later levels had just been split in half, which there are clearly instances where that would have made sense, because you finish a level by getting a key and going through a gate, and sometimes you don't even need to get a key. On a couple of cases you just go through the gate that's already open. There are plenty of levels where you teleport from one cuboid planet to another, and then you never really need to go back. In those cases, those could have been split up, and then you could have gotten another 20 or 30 levels and it would have felt just better. Plus, that fixes the checkpoint issue to some small extent, in that you would separate the levels out, and so any difficult section would be its own challenge. The system felt like it was going to be kind of like a star system or a key system, where you would always have 2 or 3 levels unlocked so you could skip one. That's totally not the case later on. You definitely could get into points where if you can't beat a specific level, you can't move forward. And then the last solar system completely is 1 level, and there's no puzzle in that level. It is just a setup for the credits, really. And there's an attempt at putting a story in there. It's a terrible story. It is told through pop-up text at the end of levels that really means nothing. And then there's extra holograms you can find, and finding these holograms give you these small essays that are pretty awful, and you can only read them through the menu. So yeah, overall it feels like the game was rushed out and not polished anywhere as much as it should be. It's still a sad statement that by the time you're to number 100, the numbers of players concurrently in a 24-hour period is a factor of 10 smaller, really. No, it's really closer to a factor of 100 smaller. The gamers really do, in the big numbers, tend to follow and go play the same games, but there's no way in which you'd really get a chart that was much different from that, other than maybe you could get a more even spread for the top 100. But once you get past like the top 100, you probably are going to have a lot of gamers that are playing small indie games, and thus your peak concurrent on a small indie game might be in the hundreds or maybe the thousands. It is also pretty easy to not bring everybody together when there is no online component or events happening or multiplayer happening. So people have a lot of time, certainly, to play games at different points. I'm still watching Psych on Amazon Prime. I'm in the season 4. Season 4 starts to kind of change it up. And I think in particular the second yin yang episode is where they, I think, are trying to go in a slightly different direction. But I can't help but feel like I'm gonna get all the way through 9 seasons of Psych and feel like it's a lot of its comedy is still would be considered inappropriate by today's day, and it's not that old of a show, but it definitely is leaning into, oh, the African American character Gus is making fun of the fact that he's black by saying something or acting silly, or there's perhaps they've in season 4 stopped using the word gay. So far I haven't heard that, but they still are pushing the idea of LGBT type stuff, really just LGB stuff, being abnormal and a cheap punchline for a joke. Season 4 is where they bring in the coroner on an almost every episode basis and take the father to be in almost every episode and having more of an active role, and get rid of they're de-emphasizing the chief character, which in fairness, she was not adding any comedy to the show at all. I don't hate her, but she needed to be kind of the straight man, and the father was also being the straight man, so you had 2 straight mans in the comedy episodes where all the other characters are getting increasingly silly and comedic, which then makes the seriousness of like the yin and yang killers not make as much sense. I also covered another video game that was a student project called EOS. This is from Digipin Singapore. So Digipin, the one I knew of, was in Redmond, Washington, and I think that was the original campus, but apparently they made one in Singapore at some point, and so the student project was released. These student projects, I believe, are probably like 6 months of development for a group of students as a graduation project, so you have to be fairly generous on it, but there are definitely some lack of gameplay polish in it. It's a very short, basically, tech demo on what they can show off, and what they're showing off as far as a tech demo is not particularly good. Now, I do highly suspect that EOS wasn't, the students were not allowed to use any assets, so I think they probably did get forced into hand animating every single tree and every single leaf and branch. The whole game is very low polygon, and the game itself feels way too influenced by Portal, which Portal, it was based off of Novacular Drop, which was made by a team of students at Digipin Redmond, who then some of them got hired on by Valve to make Portal. But then that is something that happened an extremely long time ago, and that is basically the only success that Digipin really has had. And it's questionable success at that, in that anybody who did get hired by Valve worked on Portal, maybe worked on Portal 2, and then worked in Valve and probably did customer support and background source engine development for Valve, but has really nothing else to put on their resume. Portal 1, Portal 2, great to put on your resume and your portfolio, but after that point, when another game wasn't greenlit, you would have really needed to leave Valve. Otherwise, you're going to have a very nicely paid job and a very comfortable life, but you're going to have nothing in your portfolio for the rest of that. Maybe I would imagine anybody that stuck around may have had some hope that they would have worked on something like the Aperture desk job many years later, or Half-Life Alyx many years later. But yeah, Valve does not really make games in a consistent manner, and so if you stay at Valve, you are choosing the comfortable, uneventful career, which I would personally be terrified of doing that, in that if Valve ever fired me, I wouldn't have much to show as far as finding the next job. Regardless, DigiPen Singapore being so influenced by that really just highlights what I think is a great argument for people to consider, which is you should probably just go to a better college and get a generic computer programming degree. That's what the vast majority of game developers have, are degrees from regular colleges, if they have degrees at all. They don't go to specialized colleges such as DigiPen. And then there was another one called Full Sail that I'm not sure that's even around, and I don't know if any game of note ever came out from any of the alumni at Full Sail. Ideally, you would get a computer science degree, master's, bachelor's, doctorate, if you really want to go that full direction, at something like MIT, a Ivy League type, very recognizable college. And yeah, in Singapore, I don't know what colleges are really available and which ones would be considered particularly prestigious, so DigiPen might be the most prestigious college in Singapore. But yeah, ES as a demo has companion cubes you pick up, you put them on platforms, and they have portals set in specific spots. You go through the portals and it changes the world from having a day cycle to a night cycle skybox, but the animation is so incredibly bad. I don't even know if the skybox is supposed to be real, or if the lines that I see on the edges are supposed to indicate that the skybox is fake. The way the game is described, you're supposed to be in a tower. There's not a single level of the 3 levels that exist where you are in anything that looks like a tower. You're in an open garden. Weirdly, there's like one section at the very beginning where you look in one direction to see trees, and as you look in that direction, they pop out of view instead of popping into view, which is exactly what they should be doing. But then you'll spin around in the remaining 340 degrees, and every other tree just stays rendered. It doesn't pop in or out of view. So yeah, it feels like a very rushed project. DigiPen, I think, basically puts out every student's project on the Steam for free. I'm glad they don't charge. Colleges technically often claim ownership of anything created by their students and even their professors while they are employed there or going to the paying to be there, as the students are. So it would be shady, to say the least, for DigiPen to be selling the games instead of giving them out for free. Particularly with Steam Direct, it's probably literally only $100 to put the game out for free, which is nothing for college. That being said, some of the more Ivy League colleges do take out patents on what their professors are creating during the time they're working there, and yeah, there is a weird disconnect between colleges and academia pretending like they are for the benefit of society and trying to raise a new generation of intellectuals, and in reality being 100% focused on making profits for themselves, often through focusing in on things that aren't even really academic, such as sports. But yeah, I don't know if I played anything else besides EOS or and Six Sides of the World. Those were the only games I played. Still watching Severance, still watching Invincible, think I already talked about those two. Kind of looking for something new. I got tricked on Amazon Prime to watch a British show called Ghost Squad, thinking that the first episode was going to be a cop who gets recruited into a secret police division that chases after ghosts. The title is deceptive, though, and maybe I should have read the description better. In the ghost squads have nothing to do with actual ghosts, and they have to do with infiltrating corruption within the British police system and, you know, collecting evidence against them. It's a British version of going undercover to catch corrupt cops. So I went through this whole hour and I'm like, where's the sci-fi ghost element gonna show up here? And yeah, at the end I was like, oops, there is no sci-fi ghost element. It's just called Ghost Squad. Yeah, and Amazon Prime doesn't have an easy way to remove that from your watch history either, so all I can really do is thumbs it down. I also watched a movie, though, that was a very intriguing movie. I wish the music in it was a little bit better, and I wish it had explained itself a little bit better before I started watching that it was going to be a musical. It was called The Devil and the Daylong Brothers, and it's basically brand new on Amazon Prime. And it is basically supernatural if there were 3 brothers to start with that were all together instead of 2. It clearly is heavily influenced by supernatural, but then there is a musical aspect of blues music that shows up. And again, I wasn't really thinking of it, so I thought at the very beginning where you saw the 3 protagonist Daylong brothers singing and the credits were popping up that this was just a highly artistic thing where they were singing as the credits was going to start, and then it was going to jump into a regular movie, and then we'd never see any more singing. And yeah, I was really liking that intro and that experience. But then another song pops up a few minutes later, and then another, and then another, and so you pretty much get almost consistent songs. There are some segments where it is just talking, and perhaps some of those segments are a little bit too long for your average musical. It tends to be the case you want to jump into songs pretty often. And then there is definitely one point where they meet the main antagonist character that they, well, I don't know if you'd really call him the main antagonist character. They meet a antagonist character, and you would have expected that there would have been a showstopper bad guy song there where the antagonist character would sing a song, and he just doesn't. And there definitely are points where it devolves into a lot of shooting guns at each other instead of singing song. I really would wonder if you could make a stage play around it and have any interest. The main concept is the Daylong brothers had their souls sold out from under them by their father. I don't know how that works, but whatever. So they were born with these like scars that marked them as damned, and they're working for a middleman who's working for the devil to collect other damned people's souls and kill them, and to earn back their own souls, which is possibly not ever going to happen. And in top of that, they're looking for their father who sold their souls to get some kind of revenge, but they also go out of their way that they're trying, that they're all rednecks, but they're clearly trying to stick to religious goodness, and they may be killers, but they're not murderers. They don't take pleasure in killing them. You see multiple times throughout the movie, though, that they definitely do seem like they're taking some level of pleasure out of killing people. So they're trying to live up to a high ideal they're not making. Not a terrible thing to have in a movie, though, as a concept. And definitely feels like you could have taken that same concept further as a backdoor pilot to, hey, let's do something like Supernatural, but not Supernatural. You might get sued if they had done it, tried to do it as a TV show without the musical aspects, though. Might be too close to Supernatural. They have a car that looks just like, it may not look exactly like the Impala in Supernatural, but it is a car they love that is the same. It has a trunk full of guns just the same. They are driving around just the same. The biggest issue, though, I would say, with The Devil and the DeLonge Brothers, as far as a movie, which I would recommend watching it once, is it is all blues music, and all the blues music feels very much the same. It's just a lot of spoken word, singing, a lot of repeating of short, simplistic phrases. It feels like real blues music, and I wonder if this wasn't a movie that was designed to try and sell a soundtrack, but it just doesn't feel that good when you are on your 6th or 7th blues song in a row, when it would have probably helped if one of the antagonists had a song and it came in and it was a heavy metal rock song, just a completely different style to contrast the blues that the DeLonge Brothers were singing. But even if you were going to go 100% blues, then there kind of needed to be some kind of variety in the themes and the pacing of the blues songs. I guess inherently blues is about having the blues, but perhaps there was some level there. And honestly, I'm not sure if this blues music would really fall into a classical blues feeling as much as it might be a neo blues song. I'm not that good about identifying music, but it might have just a faster tempo and a sharper edge to the word and the feeling, a harsher tone to it that would really not feel like classic blues. There is a character named Frankie, who you first meet her and she says something in French. They could have played that up where she was singing songs in a completely different style instead of blues. There's a couple of duets, where one style versus another style could contrast, if you've got really ambitious too. But the duets don't stand apart from the solo songs, and none of the songs really stand out. And I'm a huge fan in particular of the Andrew Lloyd Webber way of composing music and orienting the songs, in that you would have a series of songs that have the same kind of notes and the same kind of tempo, and then you would get to about the middle where you would have like a showstopper song, and then that opens up the door for an intermission and a break. And then when you come back from that intermission and break, if you do have one, you repeat the first group of songs again with different wording, and so that there is this kind of repetitions on a theme that happens in almost every Andrew Lloyd Webber play. So you become very familiar with the tone and the notes of those songs, even if the words are slightly different, and often the words are follow-ups or counter arguments to the words being said in that song tone before. Then you have the big showstopper again at the very end of an Andrew Lloyd Webber, which then usually runs into a medley in which you get parts of all of the songs, including the big showstopper in the medley. And often that is being done by while the bows are being taken or the credits are rolling. I guess it would be bows being taken in theater. And so I kind of wanted to see more of that, in that kind of formatting in the Devil and the Daylong Brothers. And that's why I'd say only watch it once. It's unlike, say, Phantom of the Opera, which you could watch once a year easily if you're a fan of it. There's really no need. The music's just not bangers enough, not good enough. But yeah, I do recommend checking out. It's very rare you get a movie that is a musical on a streaming service that's new, that I haven't heard anybody really talk about it. Even the Broadway and off-Broadway musicals in playhouses are fairly rarely talked about or heard outside of their performances. Yeah, and Andrew Lloyd Webber, I don't think is likely to turn out any more great music. I think he's too old, and honestly, I think he probably was working with some other people that he's no longer working with to get some of that all the way it was. Plus, even if Andrew Lloyd Webber did make something new, I suspect it would be highly similar to what he's already done. So I guess fans of musicals are waiting for the next group of people to do great music. And I haven't listened to some of those other plays that are fairly common and popular these days, like Shrek or The Wiz. Not Wiz. What is it called? Glinda? Yeah, I don't know what the Wizard of Oz musical that they just made a movie is actually called. Now that I think, but yeah, I haven't really heard great music in a lot of the more recent ones, and it does seem like Shrek the musical is kind of a gimmick too, in that they're leaning more on recognizable characters than they're convincing people to like the music. The most recent one that I think probably does have good music is probably I want to say James Madden one. But that one is full of rap, and I just don't have the skill set to appreciate the rap in it. It's not James Madden. It's the political one where it's one of the founding fathers. Hamilton. Yeah, I think it's the name of it. Yeah. And just having rap in it made it difficult for me to listen to that music. It's a different type of note arrangement. But it totally makes sense for rap to be in musicals. It's just I didn't have a great song there that interested me. Also, the theme there is kind of boring to me too. I'm probably being pretty boring here at this point talking about musicals anyways, and I will fully admit that there is a lot of people that never give musicals a chance or just don't like them and have given them a fair chance. It is something, I think, in particular for people who like to listen to the lyrics of songs, which I imagine is close to 5% of people who listen to music, and probably the audience of a very different type of audience of music fans. I'm not even really a music fan, but I do listen to the lyrics in music when I do listen to music, and I find, particularly in pop music, the lyrics are atrocious. They mean nothing, they're saying nothing, or they're saying something awful, but the beat is uptoned, so people don't even recognize it. But yeah, it definitely feels like, particularly in pop music, the song is written with filler words, and then they just very quickly turn those filler words into something that makes some kind of sense and then move on. I don't think there's a lot of passion and a lot of pop songs as far as the lyrics go, in particular. Yeah. It would have made a lot more sense in the Devil Day Long Brothers, and I'll stop talking about it in a second here. If they had made some of the songs more country, instead of just blues. Like, you don't have to have pop music, you don't have to have rock and roll in it. That there are other things you could do. You could have slow romance ballads. You could have something that's more classical or quirky, but even at that, you just half country, half blues would have been better than 100% blues, as it goes, as the songs go. Which is a weird situation, because inherently there's an argument you could make that exact same movie, not change any of this storyline or events in the movie, and just change the music and have either a much better or much worse outcome. Speaking of outcomes, I was thinking about how Microsoft, Xbox Gaming in particular, has been running their business recently. And I wanted to throw out a theory here. And it is just a theory. Some may say a game theory. If I'm going to rip off MatPat. In that Microsoft has been acquiring companies and thus gaining IP. And then also laying off some people, which I have definitely argued in the past that some of those people should have been laid off. It's still a ridiculously high amount of management amongst Obsidian and Activision Blizzard. Just people that need to be laid off as far as management, not the associate level game developers, programmers, animators, which is, those are the people that got laid off, because management protects itself and will do everything it can to keep themselves employed. But yeah, a much flatter infrastructure of Xbox gaming sounds like the logical direction to go. But because of the layoffs that did happen on the associate levels, on the actual creatives and creators of games, I feel like Microsoft is potentially setting itself up to be in the exact same situation that DC, Detective Comics, is in that there is a massive amount of IP as far as characters go under DC. And by massive, let me give some examples here. Here is the Wikipedia listing for DC Comics characters. It starts by giving you a sub-listing for every single letter in the English alphabet, and 0 through 9, which this is kind of formatted by default when you have giant lists. And then on top of that, they have sub-lists for specific families, such as Aquaman family, Batman family, which goes particularly long too here. So just massive list upon list just for the first page. If we dive a little bit deeper and click on just the B's, there is a massive amount of characters named B. All of this is IP. Every single character theoretically copyrightable and owned by DC. Most of these characters, I imagine, people wouldn't recognize. Particularly, there's a heavy emphasis on Batman, and I can't help but wonder if Xbox Gaming is going to have a similar situation where they're going to have a massive amount of IP characters and games, and then only really want to emphasize on things like Halo, or more realistically nowadays, now that they own Activision Blizzard, Call of Duty, which has been certainly a complaint around Activision Blizzard too, is that there was too much focus on a huge moneymaker like Call of Duty and no real emphasis on making too many new IP games, or Blizzard games in general not getting as equal amount of support or enough support. So yeah, I'm not even anywhere close, I think, to the end of the bees. And that's, imagine, there we go, we hit the end of the bees. So take that and multiply that by 26 times to guess how many characters of note. This isn't all characters, more than likely. There undoubtedly are characters that are named once in a comic and then never mentioned again. But then you take that further to Batman, and perhaps the Wikipedia page here only does a small justice on emphasizing how much focus and how much content has been made around Batman. But the reality of the situation is that there usually is at least 3 Batman comics that are completely separate, airing, being released monthly in comic book form, that are only really being read by comic book fans, and DC fans are almost certainly reading the Batman comics and a few others, where everything else is fairly disconnected. DC has strived to have 52 different comics released each month, or at least in production every month. It is an insane amount of money you'd have to spend to have 52 comics delivered on a monthly basis to your house and read all of them, even though comics are fairly short. But 52 comics is a far shot from the reality that a lot of Batman fans buy maybe 2 Batman comics and maybe one other thing. So 3 comics in general. I tried at one time to get into DC comics during the New 52, thinking stupidly that reboot would have been a great starting point because that's what it was sold as. In reality, by the end of a couple of years, the New 52 had been all but forgotten and was not really a great starting point because most of the New 52 comics were not written particularly well. Plus, month-to-month floppy versions of the comics are pretty much the worst way to read comics ever. You might as well just be a couple years behind and get to trade paperbacks. It'll be cheaper, you'll get complete stories if there is a complete story. A lot of comics don't get complete stories or good endings, which is another annoyance, certainly. But yeah, this isn't just an excuse for me to talk about DC Comics. Well, it is a theory I'm putting out there, certainly, is potentially the future of Xbox itself, is that they are going to become technically the owners of a lot of characters and a lot of games, a lot of IP, but then they're not really going to have the talent in their company to make games, or the desire amongst their management to fund the development of games based on those IPs. And so it is going to be a lot of dead IP, in the same way that of this massive list that I kind of highlighted of DC characters, there is considerably fewer characters that actually are marketable or memorable or would ever show up again. Arguably, a lot of DC characters should just be in the public domain, so somebody else who's more ambitious could do something with those characters. And to show a little evidence to contrast that, here is the DC.com characters page, which it starts here, and seems like it hasn't even been updated in a while since we have Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League, the game, being advertised still. And those are fairly different versions of these characters. Well, King Shark probably looks like the way King Shark always did, but Harley Quinn is definitely in a very different state than the way she was originally created in the cartoon, and Captain Boomerang and Deadshot are fairly different characters. You have to actually scroll down to get to what I think most would argue is the most important team up, which is the Justice League, which DC has failed fairly miserably so far to do anything with. Cyborg. Aquaman has had a little bit of success, but not enough. They've failed miserably with The Flash. They've failed miserably with Green Lantern. And they've had one success with a Wonder Woman movie, and then 2 mediocre successes to failures on Wonder Woman. Batman movies always happen, and they tend to be alright. Superman's movies happen less often, but they tend to be good enough. But then you start to get into the Browse characters, and they only have 247 characters that they're even interested in focusing on. And I imagine a lot of that may come down to a lot of the characters don't even have modern art style as far as their depiction. So that is 13 pages in particular. But if we were to just look at the Bs, you very quickly can see that a massive amount in Wikipedia is not being shown. And instead you're getting Batman on the front page. And then you are pretty quickly going to be into Calendar Man. So what was that about? Right, 12, 16, 17, 18? That's about 20 characters that they actually care about on compared to the massive list I went down. And all those other characters, just not really relevant. Arguably not even all the characters here are particularly that relevant. In that I have no idea who Blackguard is. I think Black Mask is not consistently around enough to be relevant. They failed with Blue Beetle as a concept. They've had multiple Brainiacs, versions of Brainiacs, so there's kind of an inconsistency on that character. Even Flash villains like Captain Cold may not be particularly that useful or necessary. Captain Marvel Jr. didn't even know he existed. I don't think Cassandra Cain, I don't know who that is either. So even in one page I can knock out a couple of these characters as far as not being that relevant. And people like Black Lightning probably should be more relevant, but comic book fans themselves may not really have embraced him. So yeah, I don't know if I made a consistent thought here, but my point I was trying to make as we scroll down this day in gaming, which today is March 10th, is that you can have a lot of IP in other industries, and it may not inherently mean that you're going to succeed or that you have anything of any real value. In the same way that both Marvel and DC, I've been talking DC because Batman is a better example, but Marvel also has a massive amount of back catalog characters that are not really valuable. And neither DC or Marvel has enough money or time to sue people that would make parodies of some back catalog character. The only people that are really threatening to sue would be the original creators of those characters. And yeah, but like the Marvel movies and the Disney movies and Disney Plus TV shows are often will mention a character, but they're not really going to do anything with it, or they'll have a character show up for a single episode perhaps, but not really do anything with it. Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. was the TV series that did the most of that, really, where they were trying to bring in secondary characters that they knew they were never going to really make a movie around. And so yeah, my point, if there is a point there, is I think Xbox may have overplayed their hand They probably should have acquired some companies. In a lot of ways, it feels like they acquired Activision Blizzard just to show the United States FTC, FCC that they had no real teeth and couldn't stop them. Kind of just an acquisition out of spite at some point. Although I still really feel like the Activision Blizzard acquisition was really done out of just management, protecting management, keeping Bobby Kotick employed for a little bit longer so he could retire or leave the company with full pay, full stock shares being invested or something like that. I'm not really sure why. You're potentially not buying audiences these days with acquisitions too. You're getting a little bit of that, but the truth is the games don't stay around long enough for it to matter. So it would have been a very different situation had the acquisition of Activision Blizzard by Microsoft happened when Overwatch was at its highest peak of popularity, or when Hearthstone even was at a peak of popularity. And maybe those negotiations started back then, but by the time the acquisition went through, it was already something that had lost its player base. Let's see. Yeah. Honestly, I have to admit that was a pretty simplistic idea that turned into way too long of a ramble for what I was really saying. But I guess that's about all I've been thinking about. I'm still playing Memento Mori, doing the daily quest, although I'm waking up at the absolute wrong times to actually get the bonus, the daily bonus that happens around, I think around 2 in the afternoon and then around 7 in the evening, something like that. Like, I'm just kind of never free at those times. And then I am still playing the Ants Underground Colony, but I think I'm going to stop playing that pretty quickly. I think you just hit a level after about a week of playing where things slow down quite a bit and there's just not as much of a reason that you would want to come back multiple times a day and work on it. And I knew going in that the idea of seeing ants as your collectible type of characters is not particularly attractive to me, even though the ants are nicely animated in the one screen you see them on. The special ants are nicely animated when you look at them, but you don't look at them much, so yeah, that's a waste of time. We'll talk about it later, but there is another mobile game based on an anime, Magical Modica, I believe is the name, what it's called. I might be mispronouncing it. It's got a release date, so once that comes out, I'll probably try it and find it is just full of microtransactions and not worth playing. And I'm still playing Pokemon TCG Pocket, but yeah, it is perhaps just becoming overwhelming. I feel like I also have learned that there's a lot of expansions there, in that the EX Pokemon expansion is really only the beginning of Pokemon TCG. That there is a EX, then there's a different EX expansion, then there's like a GX, and then there's a VX, and I think they're up to something called Max VX. I could be wrong about all of those words, but there's those kind of represent a little bit of power creep that's been happening in Pokemon TCG. Although, according to other YouTubers who follow card games, it seems like Pokemon TCG has done a much better job of not irritating people by trying to just have blind boxes and get as much money as possible via the sales aspects. So yeah, I think Pokemon TCG is still fairly budget friendly compared to every other trading card game or collectible card game. Yeah, and I guess that's all I'm playing on my phone, which playing on my phone takes away from time making content. I did work on my macros, and yet today it worked perfectly yesterday, and then today it didn't want to work as well. What I have done is added another extension to Firefox to put the URL of a web page in the title bar of a web page. That way it can be more certain about actually having the right window selected. But then that seemed to fail, because if you have two of the same window open, two of the same tabs open between different windows, and one of the tabs is not loaded because you reset your computer, then it'll crash saying that the page is not open, even though you would want it to only be working within the scope of one window. UI Vision just does not seem to really understand that anymore, that it should be isolated to the scope of one window, or at least looking at that window first and foremost. So I need to use multiple windows, but I certainly question whether at some point I am just going to be forced down to using only one or less than one. I also woke up and my computer was broken, and that is very concerning. I don't know what happened there at all, but no signal was coming out of the video card. I went and pressed the power button to have it shut down. It wasn't doing anything. I pressed the reset button. It beeped at me 3 times like something was wrong. I hit the reset button again. It beeped at me 3 times like something was wrong. Then I flipped the power supply switch and let it be completely off for a while, and then turned it back on and let it sit and try and boot. When I came back, for some insane reason, and I'm going to do a full virus scan just to be certain, the clock was 4 days into the future, which causes all kinds of problems, certainly, because if your clock is not set correctly, you can't access encrypted websites well. And with it being 4 days in the future, things weren't working. And then I went into the Windows Event Log Viewer, which the event viewer in Windows 10 and probably Windows 11 is absolute garbage. And Windows 10 and Windows 11 are absolute garbage, so I half suspect something weird is just going on with them. But if I was to only have the evidence of the clock being in the future, then my assumption is that something went very weird with the BIOS on my computer. And my computer has been the worst computer build I've had in my life, I think. I've never had one that's had as many weird things happen with it and as many problems happen with it as this. And I've been building a lot of computers in the past. Although it may also be a case that back in the days of Windows 95, shutting down computers and rebooting computers and computers crashing and rebooting was just so commonplace that I became blind to it. But by modern standards, I'm not very happy with the computer I have, my old computer. Now I have a whole new computer I need to build, and so at some point I will warn that maybe I will stop streaming for several days to a week and just have to build a whole new computer. Although building a new computer and installing a new operating system when you have no other computer to download things on makes it a little bit more difficult, certainly, and that is an aspect to certainly consider there, as far as why people may have even a powerful gaming PC and then revert back to buying a laptop and then finding that the laptop itself is good enough for what they're using it for. You tend not to go to Staples or Best Buy or something and buy a gaming PC anyways. There's very few of those actually on display. But yeah, it pushes people to OEM style computers and pre-built computers, if not specifically laptops, if a computer breaks and you just need a new computer going. So yeah, that there's a small possibility that happens, and that would really suck because that would put my priorities all out of whack. But I definitely would 100% prioritize getting a computer working and then get back to making taxes being filed on time be the next priority after that. But I just cannot do anything without a computer working. Like it's not even a question. It's like I might as well just go to sleep and never wake up. If I'm trying not to say any S-word type scenarios here, but yeah, I do so much on a computer. Even though I have phone and tablets and things like that, it is just a completely different thing. And so not having one is just not an acceptable way to live. Yes, that is ridiculous to say and entitled, for lack of a better term, but it is also the reality that I would not want to live a life without a computer. In the same way I wouldn't want to live a life without a house or food or things like that. Which, yeah. Is there anything else to talk about, or should we jump into the video game news? Very little video game news today. In particular, very little games actually released on Steam too, and I don't know why that is the case. I did see a YouTuber play a demo of a game that may not be out yet called, I think, Nina, and it was an intriguing kind of horror text-based game, but instead of just selecting text pop-up prompts, it had integrated the idea of having words in a brain, and when you mixed and matched words, you got new words. So it's one of those types of games put in a different style, in that you're in a horror experience. Yeah. So while you technically might call it a visual novel game, it just didn't feel like it really would play the same way as a visual novel game would be. I think the game is actually called Am I Nina? I'm trying to see if it might be on the front page here somewhere. But yeah, I still question, as a content creator, how you cover something like that without really just showing the entirety of the experience, in the same way that a kinetic visual novel coverage, probably a long play from a kinetic visual novel, would probably just show every single bit of content in the game. There is some interactivity, certainly, to argue, but you're still not getting to high levels of interactivity there. I haven't played any horror games in a while too. Something else crossed my mind while I was talking and now it slipped out of my mind. Oh yes, I've also installed a new plugin where if I want to highlight text, this is kind of a bad point because I can't highlight this text. If I can highlight text, I can right click on it now and search Steam itself. So if I select Among here, I can just right click and then search Steam for this. It also lets you search Steam DB and is there any deal. It's called the Steam context menu. So for Among, I can then immediately just right click and you're just going to get a search for Among, which in that example is going to first and foremost by relevancy give you Among Us, which then also lets me potentially get to type in I thought this was a Steam game. Yeah. Apparently me typing in things did not bring it up. So yeah, there's only a demo for this game so far. But yeah, it's a psychological horror game where you must convince your mom that you really are her daughter, combine words together in your brain and use them to talk, get her to trust you. So you wake up tied in a basement, basically. And a lot of these screenshots I think are probably showing you sequences and scenes that aren't really the main gameplay mechanic. I think this is your real gameplay mechanic that you have. I would assume 6 categories here and then a scroll bar of several starter words. You take the starter words and drag them into your brain and combine them to create new words, or you take the words and you drag them to use them into your head, and then you have your prompt, which for what you technically might call a visual novel, that is a very different interface. It's a very different type of gameplay style because you are instead really allowing multiple branching paths, which that is where an argument as a content creator could be made that your experience here is going to be very different from other people's experiences, and that assuming somebody wanted to play this game, they can watch a long play of somebody like me playing this and still have a very different experience and try something different. The art style here is also very different from what you typically see in a visual novel. It's not flat, it's not bright, colorful anime style, which is what you see in the vast majority of visual novels. It's a horror, which you don't get too many visual novel like or text-based like games. So there's a lot different here. That being said, I would wonder if you really would even want to describe this as a visual novel more than perhaps describing it as a text-based game. It is also worth pointing out that even though I can't actually name the YouTuber that covered that game, those kinds of content creators are the kind of content creators I really appreciate and want to see more of. People playing new games, even if they're playing demos, or even playing old games just that haven't been seen by me. Whereas my first instinct still is personally to get sold on playing something like Belairtro, which there's a cribbage game like Belairtro that doesn't look quite as polished but is slightly cheaper, slightly newer, that there is definitely an argument to maybe playing that instead. Of course, I have plenty of games already, so there's no argument really to buy any of them. I think DF Retro played around with this lossless scaling program, although maybe there's a different lossless scaling. That is a very generic term. I did run 3D Mark recently on my computer and change a setting in Windows, and so I'm going to change that back just in case that was what caused my computer to reboot. Changing the setting actually didn't seem like it changed much anyways. I also saw YouTubers sing quite a lot of praises around Borderlands 3, more than I would have expected, and is pretty hyped around Borderlands 4, so it's worth checking out as a game at some point, I think, and maybe there is just a different kind of audience now around the Borderlands series, and Borderlands 4 seems like it's going to be an opportunity to start all over again with all new characters, and so they can kind of go in their own direction and see if they're going to evolve the series or just repeat the highlights of the successes of Borderlands 1 and 2. Something else? Yeah. I know there's a lot of things that have been popping up. It's just like, here's something worth mentioning, but it's nothing more than that. Because of Mario Day, iFixit did a teardown on the Alarmo clock, and I haven't watched it yet. And then they collabed, which I think they're going to do this every now and then going forward, with Lady Ada from Adafruit, as far as talking about just the generic process of hacking the Alarmo, which there's been a little bit of success that I've seen on that, but you're not going to accomplish too much with an Alarmo being hacked. You're going to put some kind of ugly software on it, and it's not going to do much of anything else. The biggest and best thing I could think you could do with the Alarmo is replace its code so that it would integrate into a smart home infrastructure a lot better, which is kind of all you want for an alarm clock like that. Since it can detect movement, you could use it as a presence sensor to some extent, although it may not be particularly good at doing that. And you can have it as an alarm clock that's in a smart home system. Probably Home Assistant would be the best system to put it into. And even at that, there isn't kind of a great integration as far as managing clocks. I can really only speak to Android, but I can also say Windows doesn't have anything like this either, where if you set an alarm in one place, it doesn't synchronize on Android to anything else, and it doesn't generally communicate to anything else. So the Google Alarm Clock app will allow you to run a Google Home function when the alarm clock goes off on a cell phone, which then potentially could control and turn on an Alarmo alarm. But that's fairly redundant too, because it would basically have to be the case that a parent is setting an alarm on their phone and then setting it to silent so that it then triggers the Alarmo clock in the kids' room. And that's about the best smart home integration I can think you can do with that, is presence sensor and a parent controlling a kid's alarm clock. But it's not even very nicely integrated, because the Google Alarm Clock app is not connected to the calendar app, the Google Calendar app, which, yeah, it would make a lot more sense if those talk to each other, or if they were the same thing. I suppose if I ever do get back to working on the little Godot project I was doing to teach me Godot, which was a highly customizable clock, there is an argument that maybe there could be a hope to add those kinds of functions. I doubt it, though. it would take a lot of extra work, certainly, to figure out a way for a Godot app to send any signals or receive any signals from any kind of smart alarm clocks. I have some Tuya smart alarm clocks, and they tell the temperature and the luminance, and they don't take up much disk space. But then because they're Wi-Fi instead of something like Zigbee, which would use a lot less battery, batteries die on them far too much, and I haven't been able to find a way to give it the right amount of 3 volts that it would want to have it be plugged in, because it doesn't have an opportunity to put like a barrel jack or USB plug into it, which that in itself is a crazy design limitation. It's nice it can be run on batteries, but yeah, there is a product that will convert plug-in battery related things to 3 volts, but it doesn't send enough current, I think, for them to actually work. Chemical batteries, regular batteries, can give a lot more current than you might think if needed. I also saw an interesting project. It has nothing to do with video games, where somebody wired up a clock, just a good old-fashioned clock, to be controlled by a microcontroller Arduino, so you can make it spin faster or slower or go backwards even, which is an interesting little prop thing you could do with a clock. But also, it's not something that's really worth doing. Even if you were trying to just avoid daylight savings time and resetting clocks, there's much easier ways to do that using a radio clock mechanism than it is to make your own. Yeah. So no Steam Deck refurbs today. So then I guess that will bring me to Video Games Chronicle news. Because my macro didn't work today, I don't think it did any of the curation today either. No, I know it didn't, so we gotta cross our fingers and that we don't see anything not YouTube family friendly. I clicked in to put a comment on some channel, and it popped up some rules as far as commenting, and I'm not sure if that's something you can enable, every content creator can enable, if that's an experiment that's being done. I think it may still be an experiment, but it is definitely something I would want. I want to see the ability on my channel to have rules and regulations as far as commenting be highlighted. Although any barrier to prevent people from commenting is going to prevent comments, and as a small content creator, I should be happy for even spam comments, because it's still probably counted as an engagement. But yeah, again, for one reason or another, slow weekend, we don't have a lot of news. Forza Horizon 5's PlayStation debut is coming with a surprising catch. Forza Horizon 5 account requirements raises preservation concerns for players. What is the catch then? It will be cross-play on all platforms and contain all content from both the Xbox and PC versions of the game, but it will require an extra account linking process from PlayStation players. Requires the player to both have a PSN account and a Microsoft account on the PS5. Interesting. That is an interesting requirement for crossplay, and probably precedent setting. I think it is very believable that PlayStation is going to, even if all the traffic is actually going to Microsoft servers and none of the traffic is going through a PlayStation Sony server at all, I imagine PlayStation versions of games are just going to require PSN accounts, because PlayStation wants to at least compete on that field of making money through having PSN accounts. Although it may be the case that you can have a free PSN account and still play, if such a thing even exists. I'm not sure it does. Or maybe a free Xbox Live account. I know there's a free tier on Xbox Live accounts. So it'll be interesting to see how this really plays out and how negatively it really is received. It's going to be received negatively, obviously. A lot of gamers may not really care, and I wouldn't be surprised if it is not even really talked about that much, because it's very possible the next Forza Horizon game, or Forza Horizon 5 on PlayStation, just has some unique other issues, where whether it looks way better or it looks way worse. I wouldn't be surprised if it looks worse or performs better. There's been far too long of a string of unsuccessful racing games, and the only reason that possibly is the case is either there is no good engine to program racing games that exists, and people have just not optimized an engine to exist, or more likely there's just been way too much emphasis on visuals, and thus improving an engine to look better has been such a priority that the actual track design, which shouldn't be too hard to create a track, and driving mechanics, which shouldn't be too hard to really program either, have just been under focused on. Let's see. Nintendo Switch 2 upgrades have been revealed by the FCC. Amiibo, faster Wi-Fi, and more. It remains unclear if the new Switch will be more powerful when docked. It probably will be. I can't imagine that the second-party developers making the hardware of the Switch 2 for Nintendo, which would assume is hardware HAL Labs. I'm not sure it's actually called HAL Labs anymore. I can't imagine, though, if you were a hardware engineer, that you would say, no, let's cap the performance when docked to be the same performance as the power save mode when undocked to get better battery life. Inherently, you're going to have bosses who are going to say, we want the battery life to hit this target, and then you're going to have that same boss or a different boss say, we want performance at some stage to hit this target. In particular, I would say you want at least 35 hours that you can claim via light gaming on the Switch 2, and you want at least 1080p 60 on the resolution when in some scenario, just because those are nice sales points you can put on the box. So when you're given those two contradictory requests, it would be incredibly natural for the docked mode to perform at 1080p 60, and then for the resolution to drop down to perhaps 900p when playing in the handheld mode with the battery. 900p maybe really only going at 30 frames per second. Plus, Nintendo games in particular don't really have as much of a need for higher frame rates. That is also perhaps the region in which to expect things too, is that you're going to maybe get a 1080p 60, and maybe that would be a native resolution and not just scaled up to 1080p. But you're not going to get a 1440p at 120 hertz type resolution. That's not believable. You're not going to get 4K on this tiny screen. You're not going to get 2K on this screen. You're not going to get 90 hours of battery life. That's not believable. I wish we could figure out how to make batteries last forever. That would be kind of amazing. Certainly, is if batteries stopped being a thing, then it would just be how much current can you pull out of a lifetime battery. Let's see if we can get any more details. It will support NFC via the right Joy-Con, so only this one has NFC in it. for amiibo figures, which I guess they are going to at least support amiibo figures. I would question if there are too many more amiibo figures they could make and sell. It seems like they probably made as many as they could be. But with the Switch 2, they could make Switch 2 versions of every single character and sell you yet another Mario, yet another Zelda figurine. And they probably could get away with that. You'll be able to charge either the bottom USB-C or the top USB-C, which that's not always the case in electronics, so that probably tells you that both of those USB-C connectors are connected to the same hub, just for wiring issues. So if you were to try and transfer data through both of them, they would share that bandwidth, and yeah, it's unlikely that anything weird would happen differently from the top versus the bottom one. Of course, if they are sharing the same hub, that means the wiring for the USB is going kind of a long way to wherever the chip is, to about the middle of the Switch 2. That probably won't affect anything. It's going to have Wi-Fi 6, 802.11ax, which honestly, a really good 802.11ax Wi-Fi router and network is probably what you would want to go with. And 80 megahertz of bandwidth on the 5 gigahertz spectrum maybe makes some sense, but even in that, I wouldn't be surprised if you end up having to set up your Wi-Fi network with 40 megahertz as the bandwidth, which I think is what it is by default as far as the slices on the 5 gigahertz. And then on the 2.4 gigahertz, it should always be 20 megahertz. You're just not going to see an actual increase in performance in most areas if you try to have a 40 gigahertz spectrum on 2.4 gigahertz. And really, you should just try to avoid 2.4 gigahertz completely. That extra bandwidth is questionable, though, as far as how much is really needed or how optimized that really is going to be when it comes down to latency and how much latency are you really adding. But 802.11ax is kind of way better than 802.11n, its predecessor, on trying to reduce latency and get faster speeds. And well, not N isn't the predecessor, AC is the predecessor. N was 2 generations ago. So yeah, if you're still really having to work on Wi-Fi 7 may reduce the latency and have higher bandwidth even more, but it may not really matter. What this is telling us, though, is, because they're not talking about it, is that there was no technology mentioned here about the streaming video protocol that was acquired by Nintendo several years ago. They acquired a streaming video company. It's how the video is streamed to the handheld in the Wii U. There seems to be nothing in the Switch 2 to do that, which tells us then one of the hoped for features of the Switch 2 is not going to exist, which would be that you could be in handheld mode and still stream the video to a second monitor via the dock. Which that would have been kind of a nice feature, having one child play the game and look at the monitor for less latency, having several other childs watch the gameplay from a second monitor in a much larger size and screen space. So yeah, that is not happening. It has an AC adapter with a maximum of 15 volts, which, yeah, I don't know. But then it also mentions 20 volts. I don't know really what you're going to use to get the voltage that high. Like, unless you've got a charger circuit in it. To go directly to the battery, and you have batteries in it that are outputting 15 or 20 volts. Every other chip is going to be in the 5 volts range, probably 3.3 range. Yeah, maybe it puts some of the 20 volts. So if you had 20 volts, I think you probably are splitting that 4 different ways so that you're charging 4 different batteries at the same time, 4 different cells at the same time in parallel. And that's going to speed up the charging process, I suppose. But then everything is going to get down to 5 volts or 3.3 volts, or even maybe lower than that for the actual CPU and GPU. And USB-C can negotiate higher voltages for quick charge like settings and Qi like settings. But I don't think the FCC might even mention that in their filings. So it is going to be interesting to see if quick charge or any of the not so standards as far as putting higher voltages or higher current via USB-C helps or works. And there is definitely a question here as far as whether these AC adapters are going to have USB-C connectors on the end of them, or this is the AC adapter that goes into the dock. It's just been a massive amount of rumors and speculation overall. So yeah, that's an entire article to say 3 things. It has NFC, which you could have guessed. It has faster Wi-Fi, which you could have guessed. And it has a AC input of some sort, which you definitely could have guessed. And then there is one thing that I think I can perhaps make a little bit of this breaking news, and that the fact that they're not mentioning any kind of streaming video technology means it's probably not there. Otherwise, if it is there, it is going to be on the backbone of the Wi-Fi 6 chip. And if that was the case, that they were doing 802.11ax at 80 megahertz bandwidth and streaming video, video is not going to look particularly great. Because you can get 802.11x at 160 megahertz and double the bandwidth in that case, but it's certainly hard to have enough antennas in a device to fully utilize that concept. With the upgrade to AX, you will see an improvement in latency, but it still is going to be a kind of high amount of latency. Moving on, a huge Battlefield 6 gameplay videos have inevitably leaked from this weekend's test. Players are currently testing EA's new Battlefield. Yeah. Oh, man, I keep having thoughts in my mind and then immediately forgetting it. That's why I made that whole idea list, idea board template that I showed off in a previous stream. It's just, yeah, ideas just come in and then they're immediately flying out of my brain. I'm having a ADD moment, for lack of a better example. But yeah. Yeah, it's not going to come back to me, so I'm going to move forward then. Hideo Kojima's latest Death Stranding 2 trailer is here with a confirmed June release date. I don't really care about Death Stranding 2 at this point, so I'm not even going to bother to watch the trailer. I just really would have to question what that game could really even do to catch my attention. You have to convince me to play the first game, I guess, first and foremost. Which they failed to do that just because of the gameplay style. Like, I would definitely play an abridged version of Death Stranding if it was just not the shipping containers and moving things and building roads and things like that. If there was just more of a linear, you're going to go down a hallway and shoot enemies, and then you're going to see a cutscene, then you're going to go down another hallway and shoot some more enemies, then you're going to see a cutscene all the way through, that would be what I would want. A new LEGO Mario Kart set aimed at adults has appeared online ahead of an official announcement. There's an update here. Nintendo and LEGO have now officially announced the set. There's something noticeable here. First of all, it's LEGO, so it's probably going to be way too expensive for what you're getting. But they have moved away from the blockheads concept. Which, yeah, I think the blockheads concept, which was a LEGO thing first, and then they made some Mario sets with the Mario blockhead that was much more of a cube head. This is still fairly cubic because it's LEGO, but then you have a nice round hat on top and a big round nose and ears. So this is a very different looking Mario that seems like it's going to be about the same size as the Mario from the playsets, which I assume they've also moved away from the playsets at this point because I haven't seen anything new announced lately. The LEGO website and LEGO Ideas are merging names, and so you're going to have the same name both on LEGO Ideas and Lego.com, and part of the rules there is you can't have anything trademarked in your name. So you can't have LEGO in your name. So LEGO Fan 420, for instance, is supposedly not going to be allowed. I'm doing nothing and seeing what happens because I do have LEGO in my LEGO account name, just to see what it gets changed to or what happens there. But that seems kind of crazy that even LEGO itself can't be in the name of your nickname. Username on LEGO Ideas and Lego.com. Yeah, overall this looks like a decent set, particularly if this was at a very reasonable price of $60. It's going to be a lot less reasonable when we get a price tag and find that this is somewhere closer to $160 to $200. I think if you approach $299 on this, you're asking way too much, particularly since there's an implication here that you would have some kind of follow-up to this, and that you'd have at least Luigi or Princess Peach or somebody else, Bowser, in carts too. 1,972 pieces, rated 18 plus, and it is 158 US dollars. Compare that to 122 pounds. Pound is doing really, really poorly in more recent years. It used to be that a pound was basically $1.50. Once you start to get to a very high scale like this, you can see the hand, for instance. You are perhaps able to add more detail, but then you also are getting fairly ridiculous both in price and just shelf space. Is where you're going to display something like this. And I can't help but wonder if some of these pieces in particular are just the leftover components from the previous Mario figure. And today is March 10th, which, if you squint hard enough, looks like MARIO, and so they call it Mario Day. Nintendo doesn't seem like they make too many announcements actually on Mario Day today. Maybe a bunch of games didn't release on the weekend because they wanted to be released on Mario Day on Steam. Maybe that's the case, but I doubt it. Yeah, I don't know what you could really do to make me impressed on this. This definitely feels like a concept where you would scale it down. You would make it about half the size cubically. You would have half the pieces, so it would be like a $900 piece set, and then it would get down to $70 to $80, something that you could give to a kid and a fan of Mario games. We can throw out the old joke that Lego is technically the biggest manufacturer of tires in the world because they make way more tires than any other car tire manufacturer to exist. Weirdly, you might think that that might be like Hot Wheels, but Hot Wheels doesn't make rubber tires. They put little pieces of plastic as their tires, where the rubber tires from Lego are actually rubber. But yeah, this definitely feels like it's targeting the wrong age group and too big and too expensive. I'm increasingly wondering if I am going to start gifting away some of my Lego sets. I've got too many of them, and even at the moment I just feel like I'm as busy as I have been for years. And yeah. But then I could also just keep them for a rainy day. But yeah, I'm thinking of definitely curtailing my interest in Lego, and I haven't seen too many new sets that actually interest me. It'll be interesting, I guess, when it gets to Christmas to see if there's any more Christmas themed sets, which I was doing the whole Christmas Village, and I'm kind of pot committed on that. Moving on, we only have like 5 more articles from Video Games Chronicle. Okami sequel doesn't mean Clover Studios will only focus on sequels in the future, Konami says. Clovers will work on projects that they find interesting, including new IP, the former director says, which that is a very generic but right statement to make. The question is just how well will they really succeed at that. As a Bayonetta fan, way more than an Okami fan, since I haven't even played Okami, I definitely would like to see them make something that feels like Bayonetta. It really doesn't even, in my mind, have to play like Bayonetta, because the button mashing combo system of Bayonetta, while interesting, was in no way as interesting as the just wild and crazy storytelling and themes from Bayonetta, as a contrast to Devil May Cry. Of course, they now have run into a problem where if Devil May Cry is more about fighting demons and Bayonetta is more about fighting angels, there's you're gonna have to go in a very different direction at some point. You're probably gonna have to go full Japanese and become some kind of Shinto shrine priestess or priest and fight Okami. That would be the next direction that a Japanese company would likely go. Which, yeah, that could work. A Bayonetta-like character fighting Okami, Japanese demons. Yeah. Moving on, Split Fiction crosses a massive sales milestone in just 48 hours. The game has likely been played by over 4 million players. Yeah. It seems to me, I've seen a little bit of gameplay from Captain Sparkles on this, just jumping around looking at it, that there's a lot of smaller sections that you end up going through. So there seems like there's kind of a core where you're going from point A to point B down a hallway, doing some platforming and things like that. But then you go through portals to other areas, and then you have different goals that are going to be very unique and bespoke to that one section. Which, yeah. They found a narrative way to explain that fairly well. That first cutscene I saw was very weird in that the girl here is freaking out about going into some kind of virtual reality machine that has them hover in the air for one reason or other, and the assistants and doctors there are just like way too aggressive, saying you need to get back on the platform, you need to get in the platform. It's just like, hey, if she doesn't want to do it, undoubtedly you would have designed this so it just doesn't have to happen, and you could say fine, you can leave, whatever. But instead a struggle ensues between this character in which she gets pushed / thrown into the platform of this person. So then there are two people in the same platform experiencing the same VR experience, when it was supposed to be only one person. And yeah, that cutscene just seems like a weird and wild explanation and way to do it, and very contrived. Because yeah, if you had some kind of VR platform where you could directly connect to the brains of the people, you would have it in different rooms. You'd have cubicles at least between the two. You wouldn't accidentally be able to push somebody into somebody else's or see somebody else's. You would have a, hey, people freak out on this. It's the equivalent of like having a roller coaster where somebody says, I've changed my mind, I don't want to get on it, and while they're in line, and then them saying, too bad, you're already in line, you have to ride. It's just a stupid idea that would never happen. In most cases, the only time they say too bad is once the seatbelt is already down, and even then they usually don't say too bad, because the last thing anybody riding a roller coaster wants is some hysterical freaking out person screaming their lungs out behind them or in front of them while everybody else on the roller coaster is trying to ride. So unless you change your mind mid roller coaster, at which point you can't actually talk to people and say I want out, they more than likely will let you out. And the long lines in roller coasters, I imagine, helps filter out people who are anxious anyways quite a bit. Of course, that has nothing to do with video games. It's just that cutscene was kind of weird. Yeah. It is still my suspicion, though, that Split Fiction is going to be a flash in the pan success. It may have a massive amount of success first, and that may get enough money to pay back the publisher and pay some kind of residuals to the developers. But then I think they very quickly have to work on their next game faster than most would have to, because they're going to need to churn something else out. Perhaps that is part of the problem with some of the Telltale games and later horror games. Like Life is Strange is not so much a horror game, but the Life is Strange series also just kind of had to continuously churn out things because they had just far too high of a burn rate. People getting bored with it and wanting something else. The Until Dawn style games, the anthology horror games, is what I was thinking of. Yeah, a lot of times you see pretty good success in the first couple of those, and then they have to just constantly churn out more, and as they churn out more, the reception becomes less and less and less and less, and it's just diminished returns, which is really to be expected. Something very similar to FSR 4 is coming to the PS5 Pro in 2026. PlayStation's Mark Cerny has big plans for the future of Sony's upgraded machines. Never buy anything based on promises versus what it actually gives you today is my response to that. AMD FSR is, I think, the ray tracing equivalent technology, but it might, no, it's not the ray tracing technology. It's the deep learning super sampling equivalent technology. And so this is about using a large language module type AI program on the PlayStation 5 to upscale and create more pixels that weren't there originally to make the resolution look better, to make the frame rate look better. Mostly it's to make the resolution look better, but maybe it'll make some extra frames too to make the frame rate more consistent. But you really don't even have to scroll down any further. Is that there's a level of vagueness here, and this is definitely a promise, certainly. This is trying to get more people to buy the PS5s and stick with the PS5. It does give an indication that there isn't anything rapidly being developed to replace the PS5. There's no PS6 that's going to come out particularly early. We've now been told that in 2026 a PS6 is not going to be announced or released, which it would be too early to do that, certainly. But yeah, PlayStation itself is going to be in a precarious position as far as when it announces a PlayStation 6 and what it actually is even going to be competing against there. It may very well not be competing against the Xbox. It may be offering something fairly different from what a PC might be offering or a Steam Deck might be offering. And it's definitely going to be offering something different than the Switch 2. There is definitely an argument that instead of making a PlayStation 6, they should be making something to compete with the Steam Deck and the Switch 2, a handheld device that can do slightly more powerful things than the Switch 2 can, but is somehow cheaper than the Steam Deck. So, because you're buying into a locked-in system in that case. Oh yeah, now I remember what I was going to say. 2 streams ago, I think, I had a lot of views. Last stream, I had more than average views, but nowhere as many. So, I have no idea why the algorithm 2 streams ago decided to promote my videos. I wish it would do it more, but it does seem like it was just completely random. I got no comments, I got no feedback, so I can't really act in a void from that. There are thoughts, certainly, as far as things I should do. I should schedule videos and start getting those out again. I should schedule YouTube shorts and get those going out again, too. And I should try a lot harder. But I only have so much energy in a day. And there definitely are cases here where if I could afford to hire somebody, I would make thumbnails and rebrand my channel and just put a new coat of paint and polish on everything. Maybe try and make clips. I still have no clue how I would break my content down to actually being clips, though. And so that concept, I don't have a good idea there, so I'm not doing anything. I barely have a good idea on the YouTube shorts, and thus I'm doing those the way I am. Yeah, I still have some experimentation I need to do there as far as adding text to speech in my YouTube shorts that I haven't worked on. That's not a high priority. Moving on, Indiana Jones and the Great Circle's PS5 release date may have appeared online. Machine Games' Excellent Adventure is coming to the PS5 soon. Do we have the rumored release date? Yeah. Rumored release date is April 17th. Which you could have said any date there, and I would have been equally willing to believe it. And that's basically all I can say there. Pokemon Journey Together pre-release promo cards have been revealed. Okay. Now in Pokemon TCG, the promo cards always have like a little icon in the side, and I think intentionally they're made to feel like they're not as valuable as potential versions of the same card without the little promo art. But I'm not sure promo cards actually even get released around in non-promo versions, so there may not be non-promo versions of these cards. I am noticing that these are specific people's Pokemon instead of just generic Pokemon. That feels different, and the journey together makes sense. And noticeably, all of these promo cards have some kind of ability, and this one is fairly high considering it's not an EX card. I don't think it's an EX card. And fairly high health. Kind of expensive to do 70 damage, but not terribly expensive. And yeah, having played Pokemon TCG, I kind of feel like I know these cards a little bit better. This is an Evolve character too, so it's going to take a little bit longer to get it. But yeah, it has a weakness of double when getting hit by lightning. That's crazy, ×2. And it has a resistance of against fighting -30. And that's not something that exists in any of the cards in Pokemon TCG right now. All the cards that have been released are kind of older cards and more simplistic cards. This is what I would have expected, is that you would have gotten more into characters having resistance and a 1 retreat cost. And then I have no idea what this is. The illustrator is Dom, I guess, and then I have no idea what the 0 is. I don't know what the SVP English is. I don't know what 182 is. That's probably a serial number. But yeah, by the looks of it, it's not an EX card, so killing this would only give you 1 winning point. Like, all of these have a resistance mentioned, even if there isn't a resistance on them. So that does seem like that is fairly standard. It does seem like now double damage is fairly common. But yeah, double damage is not something in Pokemon TCG either. So we can see each of these individual, and I assume this is Hop, and that's a Snorlax. That says 184, and then I still don't know what this symbol is, this little star. But yeah, it's all the same. Otherwise, and I assume this is Lily. This says 183, so it is a serial number. And this is Iono. That's 182. And then there's several other characters, and it's nice and big. This is from Scarlet and Violet, so that's does potentially also speak to how far behind the trading card game is compared to the release of the actual video games. But Scarlet and Violet, I guess, is the most recent game still right now. It'd be kind of crazy if the card game came out with cards based on the ZA game that has been announced and hasn't been released yet. I managed to cut myself or tear off some of my skin right around my thumb, and it's a little painful and annoying. More annoying than painful. Well, I somehow managed to stretch that into 2 hours when I said there was basically no news in Video Games Chronicle, and there really wasn't. That was 5 stories. Now we're at the Gamatsu things. A physics-based action-adventure game called Rootbound has been announced for PC. Again, my curating didn't work, so we will have to click on all of these tabs. Yeah, I'm not sure what the physics element here really is. And when they say physics in video games, I assume physics means gravity and, you know, sparkles and effects like that, hair bouncing up and down. It is possible it's physics based, as in you take an acid and a base and combine it to neutralize each other or create some new chemical. But this game definitely doesn't look like that either. There is something as I was playing Six Sides of the World that I thought about, as far as just there probably isn't a really good gravity affecting game engine out there with as far as physics goes, where you could change the direction of gravity and move it in completely different angles and make it do like Mario Galaxy did. They probably put a lot of work into making Mario Galaxy 1 and 2 work the way it did. And yeah, Gravity Rush is another example of a game with gravity in it, and I bet you had to do a lot of custom coding for that too. And yeah, it's just not a thing that's in high enough demand. It does happen fairly often in games that gravity gets played with, but it's almost always gravity is going downwards towards the surface, and it's nowhere as high enough demand that I think the Unreal Engine or Unity Engine or anything for Godot would be easy to implement and use. And I am going out of my way to mention Godot anytime I mention the Unity Engine and the Unreal Engine, even though by adoption rate almost certainly Godot Engine shouldn't be mentioned in the same breath. I hope in the future that won't be the case, but now it isn't. Cookie Cutter Overkill Edition launches March 27th. I think we had already covered that. And frankly, we may very well end up going through a lot of repetition. Fubiki Zero In on Hollow Earth HoloLive Alternative launches April 13th. This is on Steam. Yeah, I'm not 100% sure what I even broke, why the curation didn't happen here. HoloLive's Hollow Hanafuda adds a PS4 and 5 version and Switch versions launching July 31st. And while I am a fan of Hanafuda as a card game, or different ways you can use Hanafuda cards to play different card games, I think this one is probably Koi Koi Hanafuda if I was to guess, if that's actually the name of it. I'm not sure if HoloLive distracts from learning Hanafuda. Funnily enough, I guess you could have made a Belairtro using the Hanafuda cards as much as you could have made a Belairtro using poker cards. And the same concept might have worked fairly well. Of course, it wouldn't sell as well, since Hanafuda is very much not known outside of the Asian countries. So here's the mobile game. I think I already have this like pre-registered on my cell phone. So day one I'm going to try and play this, and more than likely I'm going to be as disappointed with this as I was with the Cardcaptor Sakura game, which thank goodness I finally uninstalled that one. I do like Puya Magica Modica as an anime series, although it's kind of hard to know which ones you should watch in which order, because there's like a movie series and a TV series that almost goes through the exact same material. But yeah, there isn't a lot of gacha opportunities, I guess, around this game, in that there are only so many magical girls even in the show. So I'm not sure how it's really going to play out. The PC version on Steam is already announced. Yes, this very much looks like the anime series. The question, though, is just going to come down to this one screen more than anything, as far as just what does Chamber of Light really do? What does player matchup do? What does Union do? That's probably a alliance. What does the shop sell you? What does Fate Weave do? What is your team? Almost certainly you're building a team. And then Quest is probably your actual single player stuff. And that's right in the right corner because this is a mobile game and you're likely right-handed and going to hit that with your thumb way more often. And so these two on the edges are the most favored ones. Here we can see rewards and a menu and a full screen mode, so you can hide the heads-up display and take a picture, which means you likely can change the background. Looks like there's a wait timer on something there. And then this might be a story library. This is probably your chat system or notification system. So it feels like all very standard mobile stuff. And then you only get a tiniest hint otherwise as far as what the actual game it looks like. It doesn't look like it's an idle game. It looks like you're actually going to play, and it looks like you are going to just be probably fighting the same generic monsters over and over again. And yeah, it looks like you may capture the monsters and use them on your team too, so there might even be a little bit of a weird Pokemon aspect which doesn't really line up with the anime series. But yeah, it's a recognizable name. It's a big anime, so if it had big success that would be exciting, but I'm certainly not holding my hopes either that it would be an amazingly great mobile game out of them being no amazing great mobile games, or it being an amazingly great anime game, out of which there are very few amazingly great anime games, and there's still far too many people that just absolutely hate anime and would not play them regardless, just by the art style alone. We already talked about Death Stranding on the Beach launching June 26th. I did say last stream that I really should stop saying we already talked about it and just instead treat it like it's new information again. Usually it's 20 to 30 minutes plus between the last time I talked about it and this time anyways. This week's Japanese game releases: Kaleidoscope of the Phantom Prison 2 and Is It Wrong to Try to Pick Up Girls in the Dungeon Familia Myth. Full End of Water and Light are the two big ones, which, yeah, these giant light novel games where it became the light novel titles were playing a meta game against each other, making as long as possible headlines. And then the games add even more text as the subtitles. Yeah. So nothing Western getting kind of released physically this week in Japan, which maybe that will affect how the sales go. But Monster Hunter Wild still probably is going to have a bigger effect as far as this week's sales. Anyways. And certainly this is kind of a great example how if you absolutely reject anything with an anime art style, particularly if you're in Japan, there's not a single game that I can even recommend today as far as physical releases in Japan. Moving on, Tetris the Grandmaster 4 Absolute Eye has first details, gameplay, and screenshots. It's kind of funny for them to announce, or anybody to announce, a new Tetris game, considering how there is a collection of old Tetris games that are still being released, and you'd think you'd have more of a buffer there. That being said, I think Tetris might very well be nothing more than a registered trademark at this point, and you can license it very easily, and you could make a game very close to Tetris without using the Tetris name and not be sued. This Tetris 4 does feel very different from what a lot of Tetris fans would be expecting. And then the more like this on Steam is still going to be very bad as far as suggesting anything that actually is Tetris. Tetris Effect Connect is the only one that they actually caught. Puyo Tetris is another one. No, there was two. I'm surprised it got that far. Whereas the rest of these I don't think are actually Tetris games, and I have no idea how something tagged fighter 3D fighting in action lands up as being like this. The only thing I could imagine is that somewhere here action is also tagged, and that's how terrible the system really is. Then I could go and search Tetris on Steam for Tetris Forever, which is the game I was thinking of, and yeah, that right click menu is already proving itself to be very useful. There is something though about Firefox that it updated, and now it's got little mute buttons on every single tab, and it's making the tabs bigger, and it means every time I click on a tab I'm unmuting it, or a lot of times when I click on tabs I'm accidentally unmuting it. Yeah, Tetris Forever, not including the most favorite old Tetrises first, I think really hurt it, and you can see that the 68% positivity is probably hurting it. I think in later updates though they have added some more of the classic Tetris games, but it seems like they really held back in a poor decision when the NES version of Tetris in particular, which I'm not sure Tetris Forever still has that, or the Game Boy version of Tetris, which I'm not sure they have either, should have been available day one as far as versions of Tetris out there. It's kind of a miracle though. You could have any game that even has 15 different versions of Tetris, when I imagine those 15 versions of Tetris are all made by different companies under different licenses. There's an interesting question also as far as just how many other games could have been as crazy about licensing things and had success. There definitely was a point when the NES was young that licensing games was a very successful strategy. You had Donkey Kong, for instance, getting licensed to a lot of games and consoles. But yeah, nowadays that would not make any sense at all, to just have some other company make a game including your IP and your characters and allowing it to be potentially very different or more likely very bad. Here's a game I suspect won't come to the West. Cho Aniki Bakuretsu Rantau Hin is coming to the Switch on June 19th in Japan, which I don't know most of those words, so I have no idea what it is. It was released on PC but not Steam. Looks like it is some kind of, if I was to guess, fighting game, but I think it's probably a parody fighting game. Hin means weirdo in Japanese, although it tends to mean more pervert weirdo, and in this case, yeah, I think that's exactly what we've got here. Is you've got a whole bunch of muscle men in bikinis flying around beating up people So it's a fighting game full of a lot of man meat, which, while I imagine there is an audience for that in the West, I don't know if the audience is particularly that big. It'd be an interesting question, certainly, as far as just how well something like that would translate over amongst the male attracted communities out there. And in general, I think that is probably mostly just a joke game. We already talked about this once from Kimetsu. Looks like we might have some duplicates. The way I did things is I tested my macro yesterday, and that opened some tabs, and then I put those tabs with the other tabs, so potentially are going to end up going through circles here. But yeah, shouldn't be too big of a deal. You just need to close all of these, and then you should get to a few other tabs, and then we'll be done. Steel Seed launches April 10th. This one seems like a new one to me, but apparently it isn't, and that it's already on the fall list. I also thought I might do a fall list cleanup today, but I couldn't get my fall list to actually load. Bleach Rebirth of Souls opening cinematic movie is available, featuring a theme song, Die for Love. Bleach has done a great job. In particular, I'm going to move the cursor over this just to try to prevent any content ID claims. But yeah, they've done a really, really good job of promoting this game with different character trailer reveals, almost 2 or 3 a week. And so, yeah, I wonder why it isn't the case that more games don't do that, particularly since Kimetsu seems more than willing to put out every single press release you give them. But also I question if maybe it is just a issue of announcing too much and talking too much about the game and just making any enthusiasm for your game dissipate through repetition and just annoyance. This trailer is only giving small hints as to what the actual game looks like, and is once again very much focusing on showing off the characters, the many characters from the Bleach anime series. Yeah, they're having to show 2 or 3 people in quick flashes just to cover how many characters they have. And yeah, the tease there I think was a post-defeated Ryzen character, which means the 1000 Years Blood arc is likely not going to be touched in this game at all. Or not touched much. I really wanted to see some gameplay in that cinematic trailer, which is a stupid thing to have expected since cinematic trailers aren't going to do that. And it is interesting to call that a cinematic trailer when it is just, while it is cinematic, it's not going to look much different from the animation style of the main game, I imagine. Bleach as a series, though, doesn't really play well to cutscenes either. So I imagine the fighting game is just going to be fight versus fight with maybe a little bit of dialogue in between. Let's see, Split Fiction sales topped 1 million in 2 days. That is a undeniably big number. Of course, I still am very much in the case where, unless they could squeeze in a single player mode, I just don't want to play a game where the screen is always split and you always have to have a second player. Like, there's really just no way I could do that by myself. I could have 2 controllers certainly and try and go between the 2, but it's not going to work, and it wouldn't be a realistic experience to show off. And what's the point of a content creator showing off an unrealistic experience like that. A game called Forgotlings launches June 12th for PC, and then later for the PS4 and 5, the Xbox One and Series, and Switch. Let's see if we've put that on the follow list. Still is very much a case too where the Gematsu articles are just not showing as much as the Steam front page shows visually, and I would much rather see a bunch of screenshots and have less of a text description than to have an article that is mostly text description with one trailer or one screenshot gallery, not galaxy. The cozy simulation game Urban Jungle for PC launches March 21st. Again, I'm having to just move on faith here that I didn't miss any Gematsu articles. I don't think I did. Again, that's not very many. That was about 30 minutes to go through all the Gematsu articles. Usually it's closer to 45 minutes to an hour to go through all the Gematsu articles. And a significant amount of how long it takes has to do with me rambling on. AMD has confirmed its next series of CPUs in the Ryzen 9 9950X3Ds and the 9900X3Ds, which I haven't heard about these specifically, so I would expect that they are the same as the 9850s and the 9800 CPUs, in that it is using that new chip stacking technology to get RAM a lot closer, and the level 2 cache RAM a lot closer to the cooler, and you're getting kind of a performance boost there. This series, if it's like the previous series, still may be kind of a middle step, although the next time you get major technology improvement may be 2, 3, 4 years from now, so I wouldn't wait for the next step. Similar situations with the AMD graphics cards, in that I've heard basically nothing but praise for the AMD graphics card, except for if you were going to try to do a massive amount of encoding with it, but I can't recommend getting one right now, as the next generation might be slightly better, and even if it isn't, waiting until the next announcements from AMD as far as GPUs will probably lower the price of the current cards, hopefully would lower the price of the current cards, and by that point Linux compatible drivers in particular might be in a much better shape. So we're looking at gaming on Linux articles. I should have said that earlier. Let's do what we can do here as far as the numbers. First of all, if bigger is better and your price is no object, then the MSRP of $700, if you can get it anywhere close to that for the 9950, is probably your right choice. 16 cores and 32 threads is a killer machine. Honestly, I'm not sure you really need 16 cores for much of anything, unless you were trying to build a machine that would then do virtual machines for 2, 3, maybe even 4 people using the computer at once. We still, I think, are very much in the case where most games are being programmed on engines that expect 1 or 2 cores and mostly use only 1 or 2 cores, and then let the operating system hand out any extra cores. There isn't really a case that I've seen of games being programmed to have, say, the physics engine running on the 4th core and the audio engine running on the 3rd core and the graphics rendering CPU stuff on the 2nd core, and then the actual gameplay mechanics otherwise running on the 1st core. At most it seems like you get everything's on the 1st core, and maybe the physics engine is on the 2nd core, or maybe the audio is on the 2nd core. threads at this point might as well be forgotten and stopped talked about, particularly for games. I don't think threads are the way to go. There might be better technologies these days to make things not activate on the same thread, which might give you a better frequency performance overall. But yeah, the numbers are very high at this point. I still am not 100% sure when you're getting up to these massive GPU gigahertz frequencies. While the numbers are bigger, I'm not sure if the numbers are just bigger to process more graphics and send that to the GPU, and that your practical Word document and program probably would run just as well on a 2 gigahertz processor as a 4.3 gigahertz processor with a boost up to 5.7. I'd like to see the elimination of the concept of boost also for plug-in PCs, because it's really not the case that, I don't think it's the case at least, that you could run your computer at 100% at the boost of 5.7 all the time without voiding a warranty or burning it out. So I'd like a new concept and a rephrasing there to say that the maximum maintained frequency in gigahertz would be 5.7, and it can go as low as 100 gigahertz or 100 megahertz, which, yeah, there really is no reason why, if you were just trying to save electricity, that you couldn't idle a computer or put a computer to sleep or full hybrid mode. And when you're putting it to sleep, then the gigahertz is 0. But yeah, an idle PC at 2 gigahertz, at 1.5 gigahertz even, is probably fine, because all you really need to do is, when the computer is idling, is look for notifications in the sense of, did an email come in from an email app, and is that email app running fairly slowly in the background. More cache is going to be faster transferring of data before it goes to the slower RAM that you have, but there is an orders of magnitude difference between 144 megabytes of level 1, level 2, and level 3 cache on a CPU versus what I would recommend is somewhere around 32 to 64 gigabytes of RAM in a computer. And then it gives you PCI Express Gen 5, which you definitely should be looking for that as a minimum. At least one slot at 16x. I think 16x is the biggest speed for Gen 5 PCI Express. And then major difference here in the wattage, 50 extra watts for 0.2 gigahertz on the boost and 0.1 gigahertz here. You're getting 4 extra cores though compared to this version, and yeah, as such you're getting less threads. You're also saving $100. Undoubtedly the 900X 3D version of the CPU is just this version that didn't pass all its checks, so they disabled 4 of the cores and binned it, and took $100 off of it. It is very reasonable though to save that $100 if you actually can get that price and get this one over this one. If there's no special difference otherwise, which I don't think there will be, they're both arriving March 12th. Getting this is still going to be 4 cores more than you really need. I think you could have 8 cores and 16 threads on a PC, particularly if you're getting it at this 4.4 gigahertz, and do fairly well, particularly if you're just gaming, particularly if you're not multitasking, particularly if you're not trying to stream or record video at the same time. And a lot of that is going to have to do with GPU anyways. And yeah, that's all I really have to say at the moment. We'll wait to see what the reception is. The 9850, or the one that was announced just a couple of months ago, really, is still very viable as a CPU. And so if these two getting announced bring down the price of that one, that's probably a good thing too. Let's see, Whisker Squadron Survivor does a barrel roll with Star Wars and Survivor like smashed together. Being out now. I feel like we had already covered this. I'm still not 100% sure if Gaming on Linux puts its articles in chronological order or not. You can see though in the last 30 days it's not getting quite high enough reviews. While it was very highly reviewed previously. So this is the kind of game where, I mean, this kind of very rarely happens, but looking at that I can't really do anything. I just have to leave it on the follow list, and at some point I have to figure out what the follow list is going to do as far as how I can clean it up and actually go through it. Wine 10.3 has been released with clipboard support in the Wayland driver and initial Vulkan video decoder support. So it's continuing several of the big names in Linux as far as emulation and getting things to work that once were designed to only run on Windows are continuing to go forward. You would think clipboard support would have been there on day one, but apparently not. And yeah, I guess that would be more difficult than you would think to have the Windows clipboard copy over to a Wayland desktop setting. Yeah. Nothing else particularly interesting. They are continuing to work on the Bluetooth driver. I imagine it will take them maybe years to perfect the Bluetooth drivers. Bluetooth is such a weird and difficult protocol. Yeah. But I don't think you would convince people to replace Bluetooth with anything either, as far as a new technology. There is a possibility you could create something new, but it probably would just be called Bluetooth version 7, version 8. Anyways. The CKB Next to configure Corsair keyboards and mice version 0.6.1 is out now with new hardware support. This is a program for Linux to control your RGB on your gaming keyboards. Wine has released with its first build of Mono with the new name framework Mono version 6.14. In August, Microsoft donated or offloaded, if you wish, the Mono project to the Wine team, and now is the first post-move release out under the new framework name of Framework Mono. This is, I guess, separate, though, from Wine itself. Mono being the Linux compatibility API layer for running .NET programs, and the vast majority, I would say, of games that run on Windows are using .NET as an API in their C++, C# coding. You can make a C# program and not use the .NET framework, but the odds of you doing that is very, very low. The .NET Framework is a proprietary Windows component that supports cross-platform executable code using an object-oriented model. I'm not sure if people like object-oriented models as far as programming these days. I'm not sure it ever was a good idea, but it was definitely heavily pushed. .NET Core was an open source project supporting many of the same languages and APIs as .NET Framework, but mostly incompatible with it. .NET Core was renamed to .NET when version 5 was released. I called it Modern .NET to distinguish it from .NET's framework. So you're very much getting into the weeds here. But it is very much a weedy situation, too. And it certainly would have been a different scenario had there been some kind of open source framework instead of .NET that could have been used to make programs for multiple operating systems. And it was probably never going to happen, but there was a small possibility. If Windows as an operating system ever had been, probably through legal efforts, forced to allow other desktops and compositors to be installed, in the sense that, like KDE Plasma, if Microsoft was ever forced to allow KDE Plasma to be installed and used on a Windows operating system, then there probably would be the beginning of an open source API system to make programs that would work with things like KDE Plasma instead of just Windows, which Windows as an operating system is also Windows as the desktop compositor, which those could be very much two separate programs. That being said, even if that did happen, you have to look at the history of GTK and GNOME. Those are two very separate APIs that exist in Linux, and yeah, they have competed against each other for years and created mostly just a mess in that there still isn't a single API system. You can't make a GTK game or program run perfectly on a GNOME-based desktop compositor or vice versa. There are some attempts at compatibility layers and crossing things over, but they are not 100% perfect. It is perhaps an argument where if there were a few more kings at the top of computers setting the rules and regulations as far as APIs, there might be some more consistency there. But then there probably would be a whole bunch of other problems if there was anybody in charge of anything, because that would probably mean that people with new ideas would get shouted down and not allowed to implement their new ideas. Anyways, I'm getting into the weeds, so let's move on. The tactical first-person shooter Due Process has a permanent price reduction. It's now gone from $14.99 to $9.99. I don't recognize this game though, so let's see if we can see it on Steam and see when it came out. Yeah, it came out November 3rd, 2020 according to Steam, which that's the level of research as far as its release date as I'm willing to do for games these days. While it is rated very positively, it is also noticeably still in early access, and the price is going down, so I can't help but assume that it has just been abandoned, at least in concept. But yeah, inherently being in early access for 5 years, whether you have updates or not, is just too much. And I guess if Valve is in mind to agree with me, which they very well may not be, that would be the next step. We already have seen them put extra warnings when there hasn't been an update in 12 months or longer for early access games, where it feels like it's been abandoned. But yeah, I think we are getting to the point where something in early access should be punished in some further way for being in early access this long. Here we can see that the response to the developers says, we hope to leave early access in 6 to 8 months. It's been 5 years. Yeah. That's unacceptable in my book. A Baldur's Gate 3 mod for Stardew Valley is out now, which is, I suppose, a testament to strong fandoms of both Stardew Valley and Baldur's Gate 3. I do actually own Stardew Valley, but that link does not take me to the mod. And honestly, I don't know how you get to the mods on the Steam storefront. Like, I don't know how you get from this point to the mods. You can do it in the Steam library, but yeah, there's not really a link anywhere around here. Here's Stardew Valley's requirements as far as what you would expect, and so yeah, if you were going to play something like Stardew Valley or more simple than that, the recommended minimum is a 2 gigahertz processor, 2 gigabytes of RAM, and yeah, 500 megabytes of disk space. Starting January 1st, 2024 though, the Steam client only supports Windows 10 or later. Well, this is Windows Vista. So yeah, a 3 or 4 gigahertz CPU is really going to be in the sweet spot for most games if you're not really pushing it. And CPU going up doesn't really improve graphics that much compared to the GPU settings in the most cases. Of course, you could have a severely imbalanced CPU and GPU and have problems between that. Yeah, there's still a major issue, I think, too, with in buying computer components that you end up spending $700 for a CPU, $700 for a GPU, and then maybe $700 more for the rest of it if you are overspending way too much. And I do wonder if the next generation of computers, as far as custom PC building, becomes severely less custom, and you're just going to be buying motherboards with CPUs already on the motherboard and RAM already on the motherboard, like the Halo Strix configuration that AMD does in their handhelds, and GPUs are all on the motherboard too. Of course, that is a dangerous combination, certainly, in that you're going to be buying a motherboard for $1,200 to $1,500 and getting everything you want on it, and probably getting very few PCI Express slots to add anything new. And so you have to put all the money up front instead of staggering upgrades, although I don't generally recommend staggering upgrades anyways. Build a computer once and then don't change it if it's working. So I wouldn't really recommend a couple years down the line buying a new video card for an old computer. There is a danger in building computers where you should really build it once and then never open the case again, or open the case to dust it and cross your fingers when doing that, because the more you potentially are around the electrical components, the more things might get static shocked and break, or something else might happen. You might physically break pins, you might drop a screw somewhere. Moving on, City Skylines 10th anniversary will bring updates and DLC for both games. Both games? What do they mean by both games? The original and the sequel. Oh, okay, so City Skylines 2 also. That was a little confusing. Let's see what Skylines 2 looks like right now on Steam. Very poorly received. Yep. that certainly sucks. In contrast, at least originally, City Skylines was very well received. In more recent times, it's pretty mixedly received. Yeah. So one happens to wonder if they couldn't have just maintained a happy fandom by updating the first game instead of trying to sell a second game, which that clearly didn't work out. The open source Minecraft-like game Voxel Libre version 0.89 brings another big load of improvements. There's a whole bunch here. That being said, I'm really just having my eyes glaze over the wall of text there. Yeah. This definitely looks exactly like Minecraft. If you didn't say this was Voxel Libre 0.89, I would think this is Minecraft. Now, there is also a question here as far as how quickly does this need to succeed before Microsoft and Mojang decide to change Minecraft drastically, or release a new game, or DMCA strike this for some copyright claim. Wish some of these pictures would load. This is one of those websites where the bandwidth is low. It is worth asking the question though, what is the point of having a more open source Minecraft-like game? How does that really benefit the player in any way? Particularly Minecraft players who probably have already bought Minecraft multiple times over. I suppose if Microsoft, a lot of M words here in this conversation, if Microsoft required a monthly subscription, or you had to be part of Xbox Live, Xbox Game Pass to play Minecraft, then this would need to succeed as an alternative. But otherwise, I don't know what you really get, what a player really gets from moving from Minecraft to this. It doesn't feel like they are trying to add anything new or different to the game. It does just seem like they're trying to emulate it. The versions of Minecraft that exist, I think, still run perfectly fine on Linux and other operating systems. The Java version, the Bedrock version, the Redstone version, whatever the different versions are called. There's some kind of launcher out there to play the regular Minecraft with your regular friends who also would be playing Minecraft. Although, there is one argument I can see being made here, in that kids trying to get their friends to play Minecraft probably run into the barrier of their friends not having money to buy Minecraft. And so there isn't no free Game Pass or Friend Pass concept, and Microsoft could be kind and do that, or just make the game completely free at this point, or at least older versions of the game free. But we know they won't do it. The headline here is inspired by Minecraft pushing beyond, which, yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if a project like this many years in the future is really closer to being a Roblox clone instead of a Minecraft clone. But yeah, nothing here really makes me want to click that download button as far as what I'm seeing. Death Stranding's new trailer and PS5 release date. We've skipped over this multiple times and I still want to skip over it, so I'll leave it at that. And I now see that I've managed to ramble on and once again make this a 3-hour plus stream. I really have just no way of stopping myself as far as talking way too much. The only thing I haven't tried is just talking to other people or doing other streams and breaking up the amount of talking. And I still don't think that would really work, because the news is the thing that's prompting me to talk the most here, and the news doesn't change. Moving on, the Roll20 co-creator reveals a bullet hell MMO called Wildland, with a demo up now. Roll20, I don't know who that actually is. It sounds like potentially a maker of one of those YouTube Dungeons and Dragons shows, if I was to guess. If I was to look at this game in a vacuum though, I just don't see anything here particularly unique. I wouldn't even really I wouldn't guarantee that I would have even chosen to make a YouTube short around it. And I would have missed over the whole MMORPG element and just thought that this was a top-down twin-stick shooter roguelite. Yep. Apparently Fallout and Doom have gotten combined in a Fallout Vault 66 mod. First question is this a mod for Fallout, or is this a mod for Doom? Or is it somehow a mod for both? Let's see. So it's a video I think worth showing. But my assumption here from the visuals here is that this would be a original Doom mod. Perhaps some of these Doom mods also run better or only run in different open source Doom launchers and won't actually run in your average in the official Doom launchers. But most of them do actually run in the official Doom launcher. But yeah, I think looking at the way the 3D is depicted here and just the amount of textures on screen, that there is actually more of a chance that this is actually in Fallout. But what Fallout then would be the question. Is it the first Fallout game? I don't think the first Fallout game could do this kind of graphics. I don't think the second game or the third spin-off game could, so the earliest Fallout I suspect it could do this would be some kind of modded Fallout 3, which I don't know if there really is any modding community around Fallout 3 or any capability of modding for Fallout 3. So then I'd have to think that this is actually playing in Fallout 4. And then, yeah. There's definitely some weirdness here. And that you're getting storyline themes of Fallout, but you're just fighting your standard Doom enemies. So yeah, I would have to have gone back and forth here, but I'd really have to think that this is just a good old-fashioned Doom mod. And yeah, we really are just looking at a really long playthrough. Yeah. You have to go to ModDB, I guess, to download it, and then you play it on Linux using GZ Doom Project. So it is a Doom mod itself, with the visual theming of Fallout. And in that case, I would also say it doesn't feel quite enough like Fallout for that to make sense. And in general, it'd be very hard to take the run and gun style gameplay of Doom and make that make the same kind of sense as Fallout does, because you're just not going to have any major choices or characters to talk to, and the enemies in this mod in particular were just the same old demons from Doom. But yeah, this definitely does speak to having a big enough fandom, though, fans of Fallout in theory. I heard Macaulay Culkin is going to be in season 2 of the Fallout TV series, and increasingly I do think Fallout is going to become this multimedia thing where people like the TV series more than people like the games. And then there's fans of Doom who have nostalgia on the original Doom, but weirdly aren't really doing too much with any of the newer Doom games as far as modding. I don't think it's easy or even possible to mod the new Doom games. I don't think it's particularly easy to mod Fallout 4. You could mod Fallout 4 though, and so I wouldn't be surprised if this is a challenge that's going to be set where somebody is going to go and try and mod Fallout 4 to be more like Doom instead of modding Doom to be more like Fallout 4. That would be an interesting comparison to see. Of course, mods in general don't get played that much, and I still very much think that modders are better off making their own games that are just inspired by other games instead of making mods that are going to either get stolen by the creators of the games or content ID DMCA claimed by modders of the games, the owners of the IP and the copyright of those games. And then Control Ultimate Edition is adding HDR, ultra-wide, field of view scaling, updated DLSS and DLAA, deep learning super sampling, deep learning anti-aliasing. So once again, it's going to try and push the graphics as much as possible. Weirdly, it is Steam Deck verified if you would want to play such a visually graphically challenging game on a Steam Deck. Seems like you also get some pre-order exclusives if you get the Ultimate Edition. I believe I got Control for free when buying a graphics card, and once again I think it was on the Epic Games Store. So if I had liked Control, which I didn't, this would be a pretty good sell for me, uniquely me, to buy it a second time. That being said, I didn't like Control, and I don't think I'm going to see any other content creators coming back and playing the Ultimate Edition or talking about it at all. Yeah, I think it is more than likely the kind of game that would have been overhyped by mainstream video game media a little bit when it first came out, and in general just very well received when it first came out, but the number of reviews in the last 30 days is barely 300, which is still a very large number for something that's 5 years old. Meanwhile, you also run into the problem of should you save your money and buy Control 2 when it gets announced and released, which should be in the next couple of years. We also, via the SteamDB plugin, know that at one point this game was down to $7.99. That was in December 11th, 2024. So it does make a good argument to wait until a sale at that price. That's much more reasonable than paying the full price of $40 today, which probably wasn't its full price originally. I'm pretty sure that was a $60 or $70 game. I think there is also a good argument to be made that Control did a disservice to the gaming community, PC gaming community in particular, and just consoles in general, in that it so hyped and pushed the idea of ray tracing, perhaps because they were working closely with NVIDIA at the time, that it really created this whole distracting argument and obsession with ray tracing that has not really led to improvement in performance. In fact, it's made performance of games way worse in many cases, and hasn't really led to significant overall improvement in graphics. There's still, the vast majority of games are barely using ray tracing or not using ray tracing at all, and what they are doing with ray tracing is often just replacing older technologies, making very unnoticeable changes and differences there. Yeah, so am I going to make a YouTube short around this? If it's not on the follow list, I guess I should. That's going to bring us to GameDeveloper.com. The Playdead co-founder Dino Patty, I guess, that's a weird name, Dino Patty. That's got to be a stage name or something. Claims that the fellow co-founder keeps legally threatening him. The update here being Playdead confirms it has submitted demands about Patty's unauthorized use of its material and is seeking to protect their trademarks and copyrights. So, yeah. Things are not going well in that relationship, to say the least, and yeah. Overall, well, Playdead's first game, I can't even remember what the name of this game was. Limbo was the name of it, yeah. Was very well critically received. They haven't made any other games that are particularly worth mentioning. They made another game that was very much like Limbo and did basically the same thing as Limbo, and it was just not as impressive the second time around. So the question here, as far as the what are they claiming, and is this going to make it to an actual court case to determine who is in the right, or is it just going to lead to a settlement? According to Patty, Jensen has repeatedly threatened him with legal action over the past 9 years. He chose to make this public because the last time they tried to bully, because this is probably the last time they tried to bully him. He told him, no, the last time he tried to bully him, he said he'd make it public. So yeah, it seems like one of them is very much litigious, but they might very well also have a reason for it. And yeah, so we don't know which sides it is. This feels like a messy breakup where at least one side can't get over it and just go their own separate ways. And perhaps over the course of 9 years, there should have been less settlements or agreements, and there should have been more bring it on, let's just straight up have that lawsuit and solve this once and forever. Once both of them go through one painful lawsuit process, I imagine the rest of the threats of lawsuits would disappear very quickly. You can certainly threaten to sue anybody for anything in the United States, and it's a matter of the courts to decide as far as whether there's any legitimacy to it or not. If these were completely illegitimate claims, though, with no base whatsoever, then eventually a judge will get frustrated with you and force people to not be able to sue any further. But that happens extremely rare in the United States law system. And it's not even a thing where they can say you can't sue anybody for anything, or you can't sue this person for anything. It's that the judge can go as far as saying you have to submit your lawsuits through me to be approved before it goes any further, which is still wasting the judge's time. And I don't know what the phrase is. Prodigious litigant sounds like the right frame, like the right phrase, but I don't think that really is because prodigious litigant would just mean you do a lot of litigation. It doesn't mean you're doing invalid litigation. There are perhaps some laws in the United States, I'm not 100% sure, that might overly protect people who make fallacious litigation, maybe that's the phrase, where they can't be countersued for legal fees. Perhaps there is an argument there where in some cases you could be countersued for legal fees. Still, that doesn't make up for the time and frustration that one has to spend in a lawsuit. So yeah, that's a lot. That's saying a lot on very little information. Speaking of lawsuits, it seems like that's going to be the theme today from GameDeveloper.com. Skullgirls developer Hidden Variable has sued Autumn Games and alleges $1.2 million in unpaid work. Hidden Variable claims Autumn Games failed and/or refused to pay for its contract work on Skullgirls Mobile and Skullgirls 2 Encore. I'm trying to figure out the flow here. This doesn't make full sense. Autumn Games, Skullgirls developer is Hidden Variable. Autumn Games failed to pay for its contract work on the Skullgirls Mobile and Skullgirls Second Encore. So the way this is phrased, it seems like Autumn Games would have been the porter porting Skullgirls Mobile and Skullgirls 2 Encore to other consoles or just programming them in general. But for some reason, the porter here got the money up front, maybe even as a licensee, or if we call it a licensee, they somehow got the money up front and then was supposed to pay some of that money to the developer. I'm confused. I'm confused as far as the way the money would have flowed here, and then contract work in particular, as a phrase, confuses it. The only thing I really have to say otherwise around Skullgirls is it seems like it was a fairly popular fighting game at one point, and then weirdly started to self-censor itself and ran into a little bit of controversies there. Let's see if we can get through this first chapter and understand it better. The suit alleges that Autumn owes Hidden Valley $1.2 million in payments for its work on Skullgirls Mobile. Yeah, it's just absolutely feels like it's backwards. In payments for its work on Skullgirls Mobile and the 2015 Skullgirls Second Encore. So I guess the idea is Autumn owns the IP and the copyright to Skullgirls, maybe? Hidden Variable claims that Autumn was supposed to begin paying in late 2024, but failed to settle these accounts as of January 21st, 2025. So for a full year, they're claiming that they weren't paid the full amount that they were due. This does kind of start to smell like a publisher screwing over a developer. After that date, the studio gave Autumn all of the account information login required to continue providing community support for the game, so as to not cause damage to the game. Yeah, so this feels really complicated, and I don't think I want to go through the entirety of this. But yeah, the Revenge Labs was later changed to Lab Zero, was the originally releaser of Skullgirls in 2012. Yeah, and things have been turbulent. In 2020, players and former employees accused the designer Mike Zalmont of abuse. Several developers made individual statements against Zalmont, who was subsequently renounced by Hidden Variable and Autumn. Thelma later fired the remaining of the Lab Zero soft staff, resulting in several of them founding a new studio called Future Club. So yeah, all kinds of controversies. Skullgirls Mobile was developed entirely by Hidden Valley, which teamed with Future Club on Second Encore DLC. Both games have been received concurrent ongoing support. Invariable says it will not comment in the suit against Autumn Games while it's ongoing. So yeah, this definitely feels like, once again, a bad relationship where somebody is really hurt and there's some real shadiness there. And I think we're going to hear more and more stories like this as the economy just gets worse and worse for gaming in particular. Meanwhile, as a gamer, this kind of negativity does not encourage me in any way to want to play Skullgirls. And they're not even mentioning the small amount of censorship that happened in Skullgirls, which really I think was just a couple of panty shots being censored out. So you couldn't look up the skirt of the characters, but it's kind of weird to change it when it's been around for so long. I guess that's one thing I like about the Psych TV shows. I can't applaud that they didn't go back and try and edit the episodes and change things. But yeah, this kind of negativity does not encourage me in any way to want to play Skullgirls as a fighting game. Now, in fairness, I wasn't likely going to get into the realm of playing fighting games anyways. But yeah, I do expect we'll see more of that. Respawn has laid off some staff and canceled another unannounced game. The alleged product was said to be developed by the same team behind Respawn's scrapped first-person Star Wars game. It does feel like we probably are going to see less Star Wars games in the future too, which they were making a couple too many, and definitely they were making too many Star Wars things in general as far as TV shows and movies. And so taking everything back with Kathleen Kennedy taking a step away from being in charge of Star Wars and not being in charge anymore, that there is a possibility now that everything can just be started anew, and we will see an occasional big ticket, see it in the theaters Star Wars movie appropriately timed every few years, and an occasional Star Wars video game that is probably never going to be canonically connected to the movies, and maybe one or two TV shows on Disney Plus that are Star Wars-ish. But even if there were 2 TV shows on Disney Plus, one of those probably should be a cartoon, and for a younger audience in general. Because yeah, I think Star Wars probably would do very well to seek out the audiences in the medium where it makes the most sense, and that there is a very different type of Star Wars fan, if Star Wars fans even are going to continue to exist, that likes to play video games. Then there are Star Wars fans that like to watch things in the movie. Then there are Star Wars fans that like to watch things on TV. And yes, there will be some super fans that watch all of those types of media, but you need a more hyper target kind of fans you're looking for. A Star Wars TV series is going to be shorter stories, more episodic stories. It's going to be easier, small bites at a sandwich. A movie fan of Star Wars is looking for a buffet, a 2-hour plus experience. The cartoon Star Wars fans are going to be younger. They're going to look for sillier, less serious content, more fun content overall, and you're going to potentially in the cartoons be able to say and do things that just can't be done in other formats. Video game Star Wars fans are looking for just an oversaturated buffet. I shouldn't have used buffet as the example for the movie, because yeah, they're looking for a 60-hour experience plus. grinding and going through a much larger experience, bigger land masses, big open world, potentially in a Star Wars game. Just way more to do and way more time to spend on it. Moving on, the surprise origins and alien inspirations of extreme evolution drive to divinity. The quote here is, "My goal is to create an environment that you haven't seen before." Right, this looks like a weird screenshot, but this feels very much like a sponsored content style article. And yeah, looking at a screenshot like this, I just kind of see a weird mesh of colors and shapes and can barely even make it out. This doesn't feel alien to me. This just feels like something that a screensaver would do, or you would do with mathematical calculations. Alien to me generally means space aliens, and space aliens generally mean a high level of intelligence, which would mean a high level of logic as to why something is the way it is. Here, I don't see a reason that it would logically look like this. Best argument I can make is that maybe aliens see an infrared, and in infrared the color spectrum looks completely different. But yeah. These are 3 examples of screenshots that completely turn me off from caring to find out anything more about this game. Split Fiction sold 1 million copies in 2 days. Yep, once again, major success, with only a small amount of trepidation that the numbers may fall off fairly quickly outside of its launch window time. And then there is also a report that an Xbox handheld is due out in 2025, and then a next generation console is in 2027. One has speculated, I've seen some other people speculating, that the handheld is very possibly going to be branded Xbox but made by a completely different company, which in fairness, Microsoft doesn't have any real history of making handhelds since the Palm Pilot, which would have been the last. No, the Palm Pilot I don't think was Microsoft either. I'm not sure Microsoft actually made even any of those PDA devices that 15-20 years ago. As far as them coming out with something in 2027, making a new console is almost stupid easy these days. Like, you kind of know what hardware you're going to use, because if it's coming out in 2027, you're picking hardware that is available right now, and you're locking down large orders for that kind of hardware right now. So if a next generation console did come out in 2027, expect it to be as powerful as a computer from 2025. That's really what you can learn from that. And then there is still, on the handheld aspect, a real suspicion that Windows 11 cannot be made to run well on a handheld, and that Windows in general cannot be made well to run well on ARM-based chipsets, which is pretty much what a handheld is going to be. It's going to be a reduced instruction set ARM-based chipset, more than likely, and that means there's just got to be a lot of compatibility layer and a lot more considerations on less powerful CPUs and more power efficient CPUs because they're less powerful. Yeah, you're not going to have Microsoft secretly revealing a whole new operating system that is rewritten from the ground up in 2025, which is really what they should do, but it's something Microsoft has very little motivation to do. If they were going to do something like that, they would just make their own version of Linux, which I think they probably have made some versions of Linux in the past, but even that is not something I think Microsoft wants to focus on. if they did make their own new operating system just from the ground up, not leaning on any legacy code from previous versions of Windows, then they could make a very optimized, very great experience. That being said, nobody would make any programs for it, so it's just not the level of adoption that's likely to happen. Even in the case of Android, which would have been the last time somebody made a major new operating system, you have them having a base of Linux for Android that's not used too much to get the operating systems working, and then on top of Linux you have the Kotlin API, which was originally the Java API as far as how you make your programs and get them to work. Android, by making a whole new operating system and thinking about how that works on cell phones, was able to introduce a lot more new concepts, security, and things like that eventually, where we have very, very different experiences on cell phones now compared to Windows. Microsoft undoubtedly would have just tried to put Windows on a cell phone, and they did try to do that with the PDAs of the past. What was that called? Windows CE, I believe, was the name of the operating system. And it really was just trying to be a one-to-one equivalent allegory of what your desktop computer was doing and was capable of doing. Yeah. I'm assuming this is just a rumor and a report, but somewhat believable, although also very generic rumors anybody could say that the handheld's due out in 2025 that will have Xbox branding on it. And it's almost guaranteed. And then picking 2027 as a year is not a terrible thought either. Alright, and then that's going to bring us to all the new games on Steam, or at least I'm hoping all the new games on Steam. And again, I did not curate any of these, so I want to be hopeful that the adult games don't pop up, or inappropriately labeled adult games don't pop up. It may also be the case here where we're going to just see a lot of things on the fall list, because I went back and opened a bunch of tabs that we already looked at. Regardless of whether we've looked at it or not, if it's already on the fall list, I'm not going to likely make another YouTube short around it. The process has been heavily optimized as far as how I make the YouTube shorts, and yet it's still not good enough. It's not fast enough. Plus the uploading process can't be optimized, and the scheduling process is not fast enough. Yeah, I still would like YouTube to allow me to upload more than 100 or so videos a day. That is uniquely a problem I have, and nobody else is really going to have that. It is kind of ridiculous that uploading 100 1-minute YouTube shorts is the equivalent also of uploading 100 12-hour videos. It would make more sense if its queuing system or its anti-spam system would calculate the size of files or calculate the lengths of videos and limit it by those factors. I also still wish that there was more of a film strip analogy on YouTube Studio, and that you could just drag and drop videos into a film strip, and then that would be the next episodic / playlist video, and it would automatically just put things in the playlist and automatically copy over all of the descriptions and tags, and just add a new episodic number at the end, and then it would automatically release videos based on a pre-programmed schedule when they're added to that playlist. Suffice it to say, I want everything automated as much as possible. Of course, if I was just rolling in money, I'd just hire somebody to do it, and that certainly could be a full-time job. In particular, it's just scheduling videos and uploading videos. Yeah. Ideally, though, I'd want a content producer to also make thumbnails and go in different directions. Honestly, one of the hardest things I would probably have finding somebody is just finding somebody that is actually interested in learning new things and trying new things and can take a lot of criticism or critical speech in general and not take it personally and get upset. As a critic, I do recognize I probably have a problem in that I talk certain ways, and it definitely is not a lot of kissing up to people, or particularly even trying to stroke the egos of people or be nice to people. It's just usually cold and truthful, and I generally don't mean anything by it. Yeah, seeing this game again. But yeah, I have definitely run into a lot of people that either just don't want to work with me on any projects if I was going to even begin to include that as a possibility. And I've definitely run into a lot of people that literally just want to be kissed up to and told only positive things all the time. I think, unfortunately, there's far too many people like that now, which a lack of willingness to accept criticism is a personal flaw, certainly, which will lead to no growth. And unfortunately, I do think a lot of people are not willing to grow. So yeah, I definitely have been putting a little bit of thought as far as just finding the right people to try and include in my life, and then figuring out what I want is the first step, and then the next step is definitely going to be finding those people if they even exist. Yeah. Yeah. There definitely is a part of it that is my own fault. That was that I just don't have it within me to kiss up to people or send out positivity when that is just not the focus of the task at hand. Yeah, I'm not looking to, nor would I ever really want to coddle people. Though in fairness, I probably do coddle kids. So I definitely treat like kids differently, with basically no expectations at all on them. And I try to do that. But that's kids, and that there definitely is a difference once you're an adult as far as what I expect of people. I don't think I'm too weird in that case. On the other hand, I can also be very, very kind and very generous, I think. Although, generally when people say that, that's not really the truth. When you're saying anything positive about yourself, take it with a grain of salt. This looks a little bit different art style. Here we have an anime girl. That is, once again, this is one of these adult games that is tagged sexual content and nudity, but it's not in the adult section for some reason. And that girl in particular was fairly anatomically young looking. much approaching the Moe art style. Yeah, I'd say that would be Moe art style. I've recently had, as far as the nightmare of trying to get anything accomplished, kind of a nightmare, and just I had a bunch of cans of paint that had dried out and were like 10 years old that I was trying to get rid of. That's hazardous chemicals. You can't just throw it away in the trash without getting potentially fined. And so they were doing a collection event to dispose of it. I needed somebody with a truck, and more importantly, I really needed somebody that would have been awake, because they were only doing the collection on a Saturday between 9 and 11 a.m. and there's no way I would have actually set an alarm and woken up that way. I tried to contact, it feels like, at least 6 or 7 people to ask them whether they would do that. None of them responded at all. I asked one neighbor to do it, they blew me off. I asked another neighbor to do it, and that one neighbor, thank goodness for them, came over and rang my doorbell and woke me up. Then they kind of walked away from the doorbell before I can get to the door, which in reality is something else I have a problem, is that usually I'm asleep and so I'm not dressed, so running to the doorbell involves me struggling to get dressed, which takes longer than normal. I probably should just throw on my robe and answer the door with the robe at that point. Also, when the doorbell rings, I might want to look on the camera on my phone before I open the door to see who it is. That is probably not necessary. I can just look through the peephole, or the window on the door, actually, in my case. But yeah, he woke me up, and then he left to drop off some paint, and then he came back, and I was outside after thinking about rolling over and going back to sleep. Actually being woken up by the doorbell does work for me. So I guess if I program my doorbell just to go off at a certain time every day as an alarm clock, that might work for several months before my subconscious figured out that I was just tricking myself to do that. In the end, though, I don't think that's going to make me consistently wake up at any time. So, yeah. But yeah, I thought about waking up, and then I thought, no, this is stupid. I should go next door and see if he's still awake and at least respond to him. And so as I was about to walk to next door, he drove up in his truck, and he said he was willing to go back and take the cans of paint. Apparently he had more paint too, so 2 trips. He was going to end up doing 2 trips anyway. And even in that situation was kind of weird, because I really needed somebody that I could trust and just pay. I needed, in that case, more of an employee than a volunteer or friend, if we'll use that phrase. I'm not sure my neighbor really thinks of me as a friend, but yeah, in that case, because I just kind of knew I was highly unlikely to be awake, and I totally wouldn't have been awake. I had already given up on it. Now, had the neighbor told me that he was going to come by, and had we arranged it, I would have tried a lot more to be awake, but I assumed that he was just blowing me off like everybody else. Does this even support English? It says it does. I'll give it a chance. It's probably nothing. But yeah, since we hadn't kind of prearranged that he was actually going to do it, I was just going to roll over and go back to sleep. And unfortunately, though, he woke me up and I got rid of some of the paint. There was a limit. Unfortunately, though, they only wanted 20 paint cans, so obviously they were trying to prevent any one company from just dumping a massive amount of paint and not paying for, I imagine, some service that exists for paint companies to get rid of massive amounts of paints. And I imagine contractors too might have massive amounts of paint, but probably not, because most contractors, I imagine, would buy the paint that they were going to use, and then they would just take it to the next project with them, particularly if it's like ceiling paint, which it feels like ceiling paint is only one shade of white that is ever used, so it seems like that's fairly consistent. And then any other color of paint, I think probably you just leave with the client. That would make a lot of sense, certainly, and you would just make the client pay for the paint as part of your fee. And yeah, I definitely need a contractor. I need a guy that I can just call at any time and give more work to, and he's totally willing to take on the work that he can do, but will tell me when he can't do the work or when he won't be good at it. I need somebody that's fairly detailed as far as painting and stuff like that, so it's gonna the finished work, the part you actually see, needs to be done nicely, whereas things behind the wall can be a little bit shadier, but it still needs to be done the right way. But yeah, also I need somebody though that isn't gonna just try to lock into one contract and do the one thing he said he was gonna do, because I am somewhat flippant as far as adding on ideas or having other projects going forward, and I think that in itself scares away some of the contractors, is that me saying, hey, I'm gonna have work for you for a long time, turns into, hey, this guy's gonna be a nightmare who's gonna expect more and more while paying the same amount that I quote him, which is probably a reasonable fear for contractors to have, is that there's probably a lot of people that have quoted to do one thing and then there's further talk on other things. Now, I can help alleviate some of that by making them write down and have a contract, which you should have a contract anyways with any contractor, actually write down what is expected and how much you're going to pay for that part that's expected. And certainly then, after that point, you should reevaluate and see if you actually like the work they did and whether you want to give them more work or not. And I guess I do wonder in the back of my mind, as I've rambled here, is that there are several instances of me struggling to find people to do what I want them to do, whether it's just me or whether we are just in a world where a good worker is hard to find, or a good friend even is hard to find. I mean, it definitely feels like to me knowing what you want is the first step. Don't be so incredibly demanding, but also don't be so lackadaisical about it that you don't even care what the finished product looks like. Yeah, I definitely am also concerned that I'll just run out of cash at some point as far as a lot of these projects too, so that's another consideration, is to try to be more conservative, particularly with things being more expensive. We can see here there's still a lot of games that were released on Steam, so whatever reduced the amount of news this weekend, I don't think there was like a holiday or anything, but maybe there was. Doesn't seem like it really affected games, although it might just be a sharp contrast that once again, maybe a lot of people did want to release their game on Mario Day. But if that was the case, then why is none of these games anything like a Mario game? Yeah. That would be my next question, certainly, is that you would think you would see more adventure platformers if that was the case, or games with Mario in the name, which gaming sorely needs more adventure platformers. Like, they're really, for PC gaming in particular, is just not a lot of them. Luminel seems like an absolute weird name to call your game that looks like a sandbox open world game. I guess if I owned a game company, I would want to make something like Super Mario Odyssey, and I would have to admit to myself that likely I wouldn't be able to do as much content as a Mario game, so I would probably want to make something that is somewhere close to a third or half the length as something like Super Mario Odyssey. And weirdly, there isn't really any games like that on Steam, other than a couple. I guess Banjo-Kazooie on Steam? I don't think Banjo-Kazooie is on Steam. There's a game like that, but like Hat in Time is kind of like that too. But it all kind of goes in its own way. I guess what I'm overlooking there, if I think about it further, is that every single Mario game centers around at least one gimmick. The hat in Mario Odyssey controlling other characters, the jetpack in Mario Sunshine, Mario 64 being in 3D itself was the gimmick, I'm sure. So, yeah, looks like we might have a little redundancy here, but probably not too much. Yeah, literally just one tab. So yeah, if I was going to make a Mario 3D platformer like game, I would need to figure out a gimmick first, and that gimmick alone might then take it away from feeling like a Mario 64 style 3D platforming game. And in reality, maybe many games did start off feeling a lot like Mario 64, and then the gimmicks themselves take it in a different direction. Control is probably a good example of that, where at one point I could very much imagine that Control was more of a 3D platformer where you were just running and jumping a lot more, and then the flying around and shooting and fighting alien-like monsters just took it in a slightly different direction. We're almost done with the show. I did want to say, though, I just remembered it, I watched a review for Yeti 3, which is getting received very well. I don't really know why. And yeah, the review I saw said Yeti 3 is as bad and basically feels like just DLC for Yeti 2. And Yeti 2 is, I don't think, much better than even Yeti 1. And that there are still just some major problems with Yeti 3. I guess I didn't even get far enough in Yeti 1 before I rage quit that game to know that there was adult content as far as posters on the wall. Maybe there was a toggle that I turned off to make it YouTube family friendly, but those definitely exist in Yeti 3, which would explain why you're not likely going to see a lot of coverage of the game. That, and it's still just not particularly well polished, which is a shame, because if the initial argument of Yeti 1 was I want to make a Metroidvania-like game with 3D platforming, and then I want to make the main female protagonist have a big butt because that's what I like, that's not a terrible sales pitch. But by the time you're at the second game, and definitely by the time you're at the third game, you would expect that the games would have gotten better and more evolved, And now it feels very much like they are just pandering to an audience that is going to buy a bad game or a mediocre game no matter what. And that is a real shame. More body positivity and more variety in body shapes in games would always be appreciated. And so on that note, and nearly hitting 4 hours in the stream that I said was going to be shorter, that's going to be it for this stream. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and keep on watching. Thanks.